Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Camille had been living with Michael for 10 years. Their daughter Jenna was 8. They lived peacefully. They worked out all their problems together, just like everyone else. Michael had a job to advance his career, but good income taking care of the family's welfare. Camille on the household, giving herself completely to the daughter of their warring mother-in-law Emily, whom she visited every week. The couple has a 2-room apartment in the city. The mother-in-law has a house nearby in the big village, and everything in the Macduff family was fine and dandy until the day they went on a day off, all together on a planned grocery shopping trip to their favorite. Located in their home neighborhood supermarket, satisfied and happy with a cart full of purchases, they moved to the parking lot, and then on their life's path appeared her classmate Evelyn. She was undoubtedly an attractive woman, a tall, slender brunette with exquisite styling and professional makeup in an expensive office suit, ultra blue in color, and dainty stiletto shoes. She flew up with a loud shout, "Michael, oh my God, is it really you? How many years, how many winters? Before you, time doesn't take it all. Oh, good, like when I was young. I can't take my eyes off you." The brunette threw herself on his neck and began to hug and kiss him. She cast a scornful glance at Camille, who was standing next to him in a tracksuit and worn-out sneakers. She had a lifelong complex about her short stature and excessive thinness, and under the performing gaze of the gorgeous stranger, it seemed to the woman that she was even smaller in height and weight. Not paying attention to his wife, the man enclosed Evelyn in a gentle embrace, and as Camille seemed to him in anger breath Perla. Michael's gaze was full of admiration and passion. They radiated such happiness that his wife immediately realized that he was missing. She became longing and painful in her soul, and she looked sadly toward Jenna, who stared unblinkingly at her father and the strange woman in his arms. And finally, Michael came to his senses and turned to his wife and daughter. He solemnly introduced her to them. Evelyn, my classmate Camille, stood. She only nodded slightly. Jenna walked over to her mother and snuggled up to her. Michael and the brunette continued to gaze adoringly at each other. Holding hands, the woman asked him a question. "How are you? Is this your family?" Camille hoped that her husband would answer in the affirmative. When he finally let go of the stranger's hand, he would come up to them and give them both a patronizing hug. But he stayed where he was and timidly, like a delinquent. The child said, "Aha, but you better tell me about yourself. How's your life?" "Oh, it was a wonderful read. Evelyn successfully married, divorced. My husband left me one of his auto repair shops. So now I'm a successful business lady. My son is all grown up and went to a prestigious university. So I'm busy with my business and my personal life. Oh, mired in romance novels and no admirers." "Of course," Michael exclaimed. "You've always been exceptionally beautiful. And now you've blossomed." The man fussed, invited hair, corrected his shirt. "And I head the advertising department in a well-known foreign company making cocoa, the head office in Moscow. And here we have a branch. I'm in very good standing." But the call for a promotion to the capital bragged to Mommy Michael. Camille raised her eyebrows in surprise. It was the first time she had heard of this offer. "When are we going home?" Jenna couldn't stand it any longer. Turning to her father, "You go," he replied. "I'm going to talk to Evelyn. It's been a long time since we've seen each other." Camille silently rolled the cart to her car. Jenna looked at what was happening with amazement. She did not recognize her father. He, ignoring them, was completely engrossed in his classmate. Camille was also disgusted to see his subservience and enthusiasm. She vividly imagined Michael falling to one knee in front of the brunette and her placing a strict collar around his muscular neck. Evelyn watched him with interest, as if he were a new victim for another fleeting affair. Camille didn't notice her at all. Only a couple of times he threw a glance at her, studying her like a microscopic flea. So in an instant, she and her daughter became nothing to her husband. Had those 10 years been full of tenderness and care? Camille wondered. By the look on her daughter's face, she realized that she was her daughter to the core. She jumped into the car and pressed the signal several times, sticking her head out the window. In a tone that didn't tolerate objections, the girl said, "Daddy, I'm not going without you. Mom and I are waiting." Michael woke up as if from an obsession and reacted to her words. He finally let go of Evelyn's hand. He whispered something in her ear and walked to the car. The woman waved at him, smiling and giving Macduff a long, languid look, a confused look. He, immersed in his thoughts, silently started the car and drove off. Usually he drove with music, but here he forgot about everything in the world. The high-rise buildings flew by. The city square, fountains. The man smiled dreamily, was quiet and thoughtful. Camille looked out the window. Her heart ached. Just today they had been so close, and now there was a chasm between them. Named Evelyn. Upon arriving home, Michael didn't even remember the shopping bags. Dad's traditional weekend dinner had been canceled, and instead of mashed potatoes and vegetables and salad, they snacked on cooked dumplings. Macduff's family foundations fell apart instead of the usual hearty evening with wine and warm conversation. It turned out to be two lonelinesses in front of the TV working as a background. Jenna retired to the nursery in bewilderment. The couple was left alone. Camille brought open wine and 2 glasses he placed on the coffee table. Michael filled his own glass and emptied it one by one. He looked at his wife like a wall. His eyes were full of life, experiences, feelings, but none of it touched her. Michael was somewhere very far away. Camille wanted to talk to him, but realized that the man would not hear her. For the first time in 8 years, Michael had not hugged Jenna before bed or spoken to her at all. He didn't call his mother, didn't wish the woman a good night's sleep. He finished 1 bottle. He went to get the second, and dried it and her, then stood up, silently laying out the couch. Camille separated the linens in oppressive silence, kicked down the pillows. Michael collapsed on the bed and turned his back to the wall. Usually after so much liquor he passed out quickly, but now he lay there sighing quietly. The image of Evelyn was lingering in his head and lodged in his heart. Camille couldn't shake the feeling of something humiliating and perverse. She went into the shower, standing under the hot lines of water. The woman remembered how her husband had looked at the gorgeous brunette with loving eyes. Something broke, and inside her disappeared a great and bright feeling for Michael. Unconditional trust, respect, and adoration for her spouse vanished, leaving an emptiness in her soul. The feeling of hopelessness haunted the woman at work and at home. Michael did not voice a desire for a divorce, but at home he was only listed. As time went on, he became increasingly estranged from his family. One day his mother, the perceptive Emily, upon seeing her son, awed, "Camille, you shouldn't say hello. You're sick." "No, I'm fine." "Who are you trying to fool? Bruises under your eyes. You've lost weight." "You're not Emily. Tell me what went wrong with Michael." "Yeah, Emily, you're as sharp as ever. I can't keep anything from you. It's not for nothing that the village tells stories about you. They call you the Pinkerton in a skirt. And that's where all the heartache comes in. A woman has lately burst out, and the squabble is cleaner and sobbing." Camille told her mother-in-law how Michael had been charmed by Evelyn before her eyes, how he changed over the past 6 months, how he'd been absent 24 hours a day at work. Camille didn't ask her husband any questions. Everything was clear without words. She had seen them together in her car, and in the park near her house, and in their favorite supermarket. They walked by excited and happy, and didn't even notice her presence nearby. Emily called her son that same day and had a private conversation with him. "What kind of meetings can you have at work at night? Where are you coming back from with this Evelyn together in front of everyone? Your whole yard is already talking about your cheating. That's Evelyn, your high school sweetheart. Somehow, I don't remember her." Michael got caught first, and then, knowing there was no way to get away with it. And my mother always wants to get to the bottom of things, so she opened up. You don't remember because she came 3 months before graduation. Her father was transferred from out of town. They were new here. She was friends with me, told me a lot about herself. I knew everything about her. Evelyn was born into a military family. All her childhood was spent in affluence and care from adults. The girl was a late child, and her parents strived to fulfill any of her wishes on the service of her father sent to different ends of Russia. So she saw. Many lands lived in the Far East, Kamchatka in the Trans-Urals. She studied at school. Although special talents did not shine. Sciences took labor and perseverance, which allowed her to finish school on excellent. When her family moved in with us, it was not easy for her to find a common language with the teachers of the class. And here I am, all at her service, in any case offered mediation. I remember how the morning after the gala evening all of us former 10th graders went to the mountains. While the sun was in the zenith, the guys went up the winding paths. Wonderful natural landscapes opened before their eyes. Having reached the conceived height, they set up camp, and it was about time. The sun was setting fast. The night in the mountains was cool. We sat around the fire with appetite, had dinner, and then under the clear starry sky, we sang soulful songs to the guitar with ecstasy. How young she was then, dreamily hopeful and insanely beautiful. In the short time that Evelyn was in our class, she became everyone's favorite. The boys vied for her attention, and me. I was always there for her, loyal, but not the sweetheart of my heart. Since her teenage years, Evelyn had repeatedly heard compliments on her looks, which were indeed outstanding. Nature had bestowed her with a lush head of hair, and her wing-colored hair created a contrast with the softly pink skin of her face, from which the blush never left. Eyes. Evelyn's were light brown, some sort of coffee color. Framed by fluffy black lashes, they always attracted the eyes of others. The lips had a beautiful shape and medium fullness. Therefore, the girl's smile was appealing and none of a figure. Evelyn had a magnificent straight back, long, slender legs, high breasts, and a graceful waist, and her movements were smooth and fine. Everyone kept telling her that with such looks Evelyn should apply to be an artist, and they convinced her. And that's when everyone rejoiced at the prospect. I was inordinately sad that I would remain in my city without this beauty. I looked at her happy and cheerful, sitting by the fire, and I wanted to cry. But a week later she got on a fast train and went to conquer the capital. But in Moscow all her hopes were dashed to dust. Such beauties, there were a lot of upholstery thresholds of theater schools. She realized that in addition to external data for this profession needs a special talent. So no matter how frustrating it was for her, Evelyn admitted to herself that she didn't have it and didn't have it. And then she texted me and I called her a lot. And then my love got married and forgot about me, and I became her eternal slave from the first moment I saw her. I idolized her. As soon as I saw Evelyn outside our classroom, I was lost forever. You know, she was so beautiful. And now she's just so gorgeous. I recoil when I see her, but when she was young, she didn't even consider me as her boyfriend. I was just a friend with a handkerchief to comfort her with a strong shoulder, and she chose her suitors to match. I was so sick to my stomach, especially from her indifference. And then suddenly she threw herself into my arms. I was dumbfounded by such attention from her. Now I can't live a day without her. I can't stop thinking about seeing her, to hear her low, enveloping voice. My feet carry me to her. I can't resist the feeling. I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm so glad to have her in my life. That's it, Mom. She's my destiny. A bitter grin froze on Emily's face. How do you explain it to your mom? Is it a hobby to do? You're ready to give up on Jenna too. That's the thing, I'm not. But it's not a hobby, you see. I've carried that feeling through the years. I don't want to think about it until time shows. I feel sorry for you, son, for you. I understand your feelings, but reason and experience don't tell me you'll regret leaving your family. Evelyn is playing you for boredom. All this will pass like a misty haze. She'll leave you without regret. and you'll be left with your feelings for her. You're an easy trophy for her, and she'll get bored and bored. Think of your daughter. What's she like? Think of yourself growing up fatherless. Is that a good thing? Don't say that, Mom. You don't know anything. She says those words to me. She's so tender. She makes me feel good. If you don't have feelings, why don't you love yourself? To live with someone you don't love. And when he grows up, he'll understand and forgive her. Think 100 times, son. You won't find someone like Camille, Mom. Enough with the admonishment. I'll decide who I want to live with. Michael lowered his head, abruptly turned away from his mother, and walked out of her house, slamming the door. Emily sighed heavily. Scant tears rolled from her eyes. It was easy to condemn her son. After all, it wasn't the right thing to do, but she had her own forbidden love in her life, which she never told anyone about. Only the memory of her heart carefully guarded this personal secret. Emily from childhood was very inquisitive, often with their direct, and sometimes even very unpleasant questions embarrassed kindergarten teachers, and then teachers. At school, her parents were often reprimanded too early. Your daughter is sticking her nose into her own business. They couldn't. They lacked pedagogical talent. The true motivation behind this behavior. And at the heart of Jubilee's curiosity was a special interest, a study of the actions of others. Why and why? These are the main questions that bothered the inquisitive mind, girls. So, watching her classmates, she caught an inveterate thief, Benjamin, squeezing him between two huge flower pots with mustaches. The girl demanded her purse back. Rick, the sandwich container. Or did I expose you in front of everyone? Figures, Benjamin replied and punched her. Emily fell to the floor. But it wasn't the pain. It was anger that made her angry, but resentment for the pickpocket's twist. Even so, she once again shamed the kid and advised him to return the stranger's goods. The girl waited patiently for him to do so. Benjamin for almost a week portrayed independence, ignoring her blue eyes that constantly followed him. And on Friday at big recess, when the children were eating lunch in the cafeteria, he put down what he had taken in their master's satchel. True, he didn't return the sandwich. He destroyed it immediately. For a while, Benjamin stopped stealing, and Emily lost her vigilance. But when in the 3rd grade he stole a classmate's New Year's gift, Emily said in front of the whole class and the teacher that she knew whose hands it was. Her claim was met with skepticism by many, including Ethan's teacher. But in vain. She quickly unmasked the impure classmate. And since 5th grade, Emily has been nicknamed Pinkerton in a skirt. All criminal situations, all missing persons, all disappearances could be solved by this fragile girl. When asked how she did it, she answered pure logic. She studied perfectly well, and teachers prophesied that she would study law and become an investigator. But Emily preferred economics and became the head of a branch of a well-known bank in the city. Investigations she left herself as a hottie, but even before entering the institute, she together with William managed to unravel several cases of stolen vehicles, theft of yard utensils. That's when they started working together. Emily was sort of a freelance consultant. William was known as an impulsive left-handed guy. Sometimes it prevented him from analyzing a situation well. Emily thoughtfully and leisurely studied all the case materials and figured out the culprit or found a solution in one way only she knew. Villagers ran to the girl if they needed help. For example, once in a straight commodity was brought warm things, sweaters, fall and winter coats, jackets, and in the morning found only empty shoulders. And the saleswoman Nancy appealed not to the district police, but to Emily. Emily help. In the meantime, back and forth. And if the case is filed, they'll drag me through the courts. And it won't do any good. And I'll have to pay for them out of my own pocket. Write a report to the police. Let William investigate. And I'll take over. And indeed, the girl did cooperate with the official investigation. For 2 weeks, she was a regular at local cafes in the store and in the evenings at discos, looked at everything and listened to everything. She watched her own, and the newcomers listened to what the grandmothers on the benches were talking about. Once at a disco, she noticed two lanky young men. The girl learned that the guys had worked to build a barn and a single-family garage. They behaved brazenly. The girls were dragged into their dance circle by force, and the guys who tried to protect them offered to compete in the yard. But that the village is cramped, we go out into the street and 4 kilometers with one-on-one. One day, Nikolai, Alekin, and Jack went out to shoot with strangers. Her classmates who were engaged in the boxing section. Emily was not afraid and approached them. Cole, Maffei, do not cripple these inconsiderate guys. She turned to Gradsky guys. And you, take care of yourselves. Wake up from here. You messed with the wrong guys. They're the kind of athletes you can't pick a bone with. Thanks to the girls' efforts, a big fight was avoided, and both sides separated. And the construction workers never came to the dance again, and Emily went to the city to the market on her day off. It occurred to her that the stolen goods could be traded there by William in a hurry. What can you, William, with your detective mind, suggest to me? And that you, William, are always running ahead of the train, and I'm in the process. But if anything, I think you'll be the first to know. And at the bazaar, the girl did run into a saleswoman who offered sweaters and jackets. Her name was Sophia. The woman Emily knew. She lived in a neighboring village. The next day, the girl came to the market square again, and from afar, so as not to be noticed, observed how vividly Claudia's trade was going on. By evening, the woman had sold everything. Emily quickly got ready to leave. Suddenly, she saw that one of those city boys, who was scandalizing at the disco, approached the peddler, and she handed him a weighty bundle of money. The guy headed for the exit of the market and walked past her. He was wearing a sweater with the same pattern as the one stolen from the village store. She dialed the number of the district police officer and told him in detail about what she had seen. 15 minutes later, a police car arrived at the market, and Smith was taken right under the white hands. She was immediately taken to the station from William. The girl learned that she quickly cracked and gave up her accomplices. It turned out that one of them was her nephew. True, the woman swore and swore that she did not know that the products were stolen. She thought that the guys had bought it themselves to develop their business, and she was promised a percentage. Then there was the successful case of the White Bull, as the district police jokingly called him. It came from the Bracker family. Their livestock, and it was quite difficult to find it. But the young detective succeeded, found Emily, and seen species. Well, such a necessary spouse's Smith pickup truck, which one night stole young guys from the neighboring village. She also had a cucumber on her account. Bad business when a company of local alcoholics cleaned the cellar of economic and industrious Little. Soon about her detective talents in the village began to make legends. Rumors spread quickly, and fellow villagers who have a snout in the gun. When Emily approached them, they quickly shut up and retreated. Even ordinary men and women began to fear her. What if she finds out about lovers' stash from the spouses, or about covered with the dust of centuries family Tanya? But he loved Emily very much. The chairman of the Kolkos, who quickly met her under very interesting circumstances. Joe suspected his employees of stealing. Someone in the garage was draining gasoline and diesel fuel. Emily studied all the reports and immediately found out the culprits. Joe resigns at the garage. He's stealing. That's how I beat him out of town. I don't have people with a normal education. I'm telling you it's him, and I can prove it. Your accountants and I found out all the frauds. Take Joy, a simple laborer with no education. Find people who are loyal and honest. The chairman didn't listen to her and left that worker. And a month later, he was convinced of the rightness when he suddenly returned from the city early. And along the garage are personal cars, and their owners take out of their canisters and barrels filled with gasoline. That's when Joy became furious, ran into the garage, and started yelling at him, "Ah, you bastard. Run to the personnel department and write your own resignation. Otherwise I will call law enforcement agencies, and you'll be as nice as acute to answer according to the law." Emily, then the chairman, thanked me and repented for not heeding it at once. how much damage this ghoul had caused to the collective farm. "You shouldn't have let him go." "Semyonic," said the girl, "I see how he got in. Will he ever follow an honest path? How will you write off the losses?" "No way." I waved my hand. "He'll pay it back gradually. We'll save money. Suit yourself. It's up to you." The villagers recognized the friendship between Emily and the collective farm chairman. Those who were dirty stopped carrying grain and vegetables from the collective farm. They were afraid that she would expose them in a flash. Many people had a grudge against her. They said that she looked like a curious Varvara who would have a denunciation to tear off so that she would not eat or investigate anything. "Is that what you were born into, Emily? You even have the look of an experienced operative or investigator, eye to eye. Only in our field do they look that way. You'll notice that normal people look away quickly when they're talking, but our tribe can stare at someone else indefinitely. But that's what we've been trained to do. Is it natural for you?" "Well, how can I put it, William? I can't answer that question because I've never really thought about it." "Well, it is what it is. God gave you abilities. Then you've got to work them out on this earth. But I must say, you're doing it faithfully." The district officer admired her. "Aren't you afraid of any ill-wishers in your life?" "I don't need 3, William. It's not in my nature. I won't sit in the bushes anyway. You know I'm a straightforward and guileless man." William was looking at water, wasn't he? Shrewd Emily didn't like thieves and crooks, and those who had affairs on the side. She instantly identified adultery lovers without much strain, but the wives and husbands of cheaters did not give up and did not tell about them except only those who began to suspect something and agonized in ignorance. But those came for certainty without the desire to organize a scandal or divorce. They only wanted to reveal the rivals and return their grateful ones to the family. "So, before you say anything," Emily was having life-saving conversations with the deceived, like Lena or Light. "Did you listen to yourself first? Could you forgive him for being a cheater? Or not? Think about it. And only then act, making a decision to save the family or destroy it." Most often after communicating with Emily, men just screwed the spouses, and women organized terror to their husbands. Therefore, those, although drawn to the side, they were afraid of exposure, and the desire to commit such feats over time they subsided. Of course, when Emily went to the city and lived there for a long time in the village, everything returned to normal. After graduation, the girl thought for a long time about whether to stay in the city or return to her native land. Warm, autumn, tea, tired of wandering on rented apartments, she was walking in the park, thinking about the prospects of her future life. Her thoughts were in Malinovka. She really wanted to return to her parents' house. There, in the world of her childhood, she was always warm and cozy, calm and joyful. There she was never bored. She was loved, she was helped, giving delicate advice, consoled. And here it was difficult. Life with rigid rules. There is no room for weaknesses. No one needs you. Emily's soul was sad, and it wasn't easy financially. All summer her father and mother helped her financially and provided her with everything she needed. They sent her chickens, eggs, potatoes, onions, cabbage, and some money. But she did not want to be a burden to them and was constantly tormented by pangs of conscience. It was time to earn her own money. Emily thought about her future and stopped near an open bandstand. There was a brass band concert going on. She sat down on a bench, admiring the foliage of the trees, which autumn had barely had time to wish away. Sad and restless was on the girl's soul. What awaited her ahead? How to find herself in the city? With whom to consult? Would she like her job? It was completely lost in the frantic urban rhythm, where people used to easily brush off other people's troubles. Never. That's the eternal excuse for human indifference. Emily so lacked warmth, care, attention, leisurely and rural life. The smell of meadow grasses, the vastness of fields to the smooth rhythm of music. She thought about her own things, and finally, she made a final decision to return to the village. The girl got up from the bench and headed for the exit from the park. "Girl, you left your purse," she heard. She looked back. In front of her stood a nice young man. A smile shone on his good-natured face. "I'm looking forward to spending the evening in the company of a good man." He held out his purse to her. "What makes you think I'm like that?" Emily grinned. "I feel it," the guy replied. "So, can I walk you out?" "Walk me out?" Emily shrugged. "I don't really care." "I don't," the guy said, and introduced himself as Ethan. "Emily," she replied. "So tell me, why are you walking alone in the park with a sad face?" "I live alone in the city." The girl was not confused, studying as it was not up to buddy relations. "But I come to you with the friendliest of intentions," said Ethan. "Well, I don't know. Right off the bat. Why not right away? Why do you need to observe some time limits to maintain contrived decency? We live in a modern world. When I saw you, I realized I had to spend the evening with you, and you can kick me out of here. I'm not leaving." "Well, if everything is so serious, then so we will be friends," laughed Emily. "That's great. That's what I want," rejoiced the young man. "And first, so you don't doubt me, I'll tell you about myself." "Oh, that will be good," Emily agreed. "I am a native of this city. I live nearby with my parents. I plan to develop as a restaurateur in the future." "That's a terrific biography," smiled the girl. "I'm sure people who love to cook can't be mean. But I am not from here and came from Malinowsk. I was taken to the bank. Now I'm on an internship. I've got a lot to learn. I learned a lot of new things. It's different in practice than it is in theory." "Emily, tomorrow's a day off. I'm inviting you to take a walk around the city at night and use the first name. I think it's time." The girl was very surprised, but agreed. It was impossible to refuse Ethan's offer. He smiled charmingly and held out his hand to her. She found herself hard and hot with that touch. The guy had drawn her even more to him. They walked around the city until dawn, enjoying the warm, starry evening, telling each other about themselves. Soon their conversation became frank and went from memories to inner heart itches. Emily told Ethan about her beautiful childhood, her adolescence, and the crimes she had solved. Would the name stay in the city or retreat to his small homeland? During her narration, his eyebrows went upwards in surprise, then frowned. His gaze became interested when the girl returned to matters from her past, and he shared the happy pages of his life. There were many of them, and Emily was imbued with pictures of his past and present. She listened to the complexities of the Macduff family, how hard Ethan's father created his business, how together with his mother they supported him, how they united and moved together to the cherished goal. Now Michael Egorovich Macduff had the largest fast food chain in the city, and he was becoming a deputy and mastered this new for him social role with great enthusiasm. Ethan's mother, Anna Viktorovna, devoted her life to her family. For many years, she was an impeccable organizer of everyday life and a permanent assistant to his father. Dutch, despite the turbulent social life, managed to bring up her father well. Emily understood that in front of her a wonderful man who values human relationships, strives for family happiness, able to care for loved ones, and sympathize with the people around him. He is ready to reach material heights, but he will not sacrifice his ideals, destroy the peace of mind, go over people's heads. Next to Ethan, she felt protected and desirable. Having parted at dawn, the young people agreed on a new date. They began to see each other constantly, and the intimacy between them grew stronger. Everything came together. Preferences in literature, interest in detectives and movies, passion for theater, passion for tourism, views on life, attitude to animals, and gastronomic predilections, arising tender feelings on the basis of a common outlook, were strengthened by physical passion. But Ethan did not rush the girl. He waited for her consent. Sure enough, one day it happened. Ethan rented a beautiful hotel room and ordered dinner there. The atmosphere was disposing and romantic. Emily completely trusted the young man, giving him the role of a leading man in a close relationship. Having learned the joy of carnal love, the girl opened herself towards this sensual mystery of human existence. She was loved and happy. Every day she blossomed more and more. And of course, now she was staying in the city. Love had given her wings, thanks to which new things in her work came easily to her. There was more and more in common between them. It seemed to the girl that God had sent her a loved one in response to her innermost thoughts. She was all alone in this city, lost and unsettled, and now it was as if they were two halves merged into one. The lovers couldn't agree with each other, discussing comedies and adventure novels. A love of pie and potatoes. Ethan was an attentive and grateful man, and the girl listened to his advice. The groom impressed her with his intelligence, culture, communication, enthusiastic attitude to life. Soon, his parents bought him a 2-room apartment, where he often invited to dinner. Emily's favorite once said at the table, "Ethan, I really want to be with you all my life. Marry me." "Oh, suddenly things are moving so fast for you." Emily was amazed. She hugged her lover, clung tightly to him, and replied, "Of course, to be with you always. It is a great happiness." "I agree." Ethan was looking for an opportunity to introduce Emily to his parents. He had made careful preparations for the occasion. The Dutch were kind and hospitable people. Despite their high position in society, they didn't suffer from pride and communicated in a simple manner. So they liked the smart and cheerful Emily right away. They treated her like a daughter. They were tactful and considerate. Soon both Emily's mother and father came to town to meet the groom. Then there was a big matchmaking meeting in full force. Parents and children discussed future plans, details of the upcoming wedding. When all formalities were observed, Ethan bought a tourist tour to Gelendzhik, and there made Emily an official proposal. It happened on a warm morning on the seashore. He gave his beloved a gold ring with a diamond and asked her to become his wife. Emily's joy was unbounded. This guy entered her life so unexpectedly and illuminated it with the bright light of true love. The girl put his gift on her finger. "It's just a miracle, our meeting. It's a good thing I forgot my handbag on the bench. I can already see myself in the bride's dress." They kissed and continued to enjoy the sea, the sound of the surf, and their tender feelings. A year and a half after meeting in the park, the young married. They wanted a modest celebration and privacy, but their parents did not agree with them and defended a large wedding, arguing that they have children alone and do not need to save money on the holiday. Therefore, the festivities turned out with a swing. Cheerful and noisy company of 50 invitees occupied a cozy restaurant. Toastmaster tried to make the wedding interesting. Jokes, contests, and incendiary dances did not let the young and guests get bored. The bride remembered this bright event for life. According to all omens, the bet prophesied a strong marriage, intoxicating love, and beautiful children. In the first years of married life, the young souls of each other guessed any desires, openly shared impressions of work and personal experiences. They were attracted to each other like a magnet. It seemed that it would never end. And then a baby boy appeared in the family. Ethan literally carried his wife and little Michael in his arms. By then, he had opened his own restaurant. His father was a big help, but despite his busy schedule, he always found time for his family. Emily was raised in a rural, patriarchal family. In it, the last word was always for Dad, so she respected her husband's opinion and considered him the truth in the last instance. Even the name for her son was chosen by him, in honor of his father. Michael, Macduff. It seemed like the perfect combination to Ethan, and Ethan agreed with him wholeheartedly. The boy inherited his father's blonde hair. It was naturally curly and thick. From his mother, amazing, lively eyes trimmed with thick black eyelashes. Parents spoiled the little boy with everything they could. Emily loved him madly, admiring in the child the features of her husband. Michael grew up and in his appearance and behavior really traced a similarity with his father. Ethan had little time to communicate with the child due to his busy schedule. Therefore, Evelyn could not deny him anything in rare moments. The boy was used to being in the center of attention and demanded in any way. When he went to school, the difficulties began. Ethan and Emily were not specialists in the field of education, but they were sure that their son would perfectly cope with all school tasks. But it was not so. On the first day of school, the child was so bored that he missed a lesson, just ran away at a big break. And the teacher did not immediately notice it. As it turned out, Michael did not want to learn. He explained his reluctance to go to school by the fact that he was allergic to teachers. Teachers complained about the boy's behavior: stubbornness, intransigence, and arrogance, sharpness. Sometimes he flatly refused to obey the requirements of discipline. Michael did everything in defiance and keenly perceived any criticism. Emily even took him to a psychologist. Ethan didn't go with her. He thought it was none of his business. After talking to the child, the specialist gave his verdict: "Your son is perfectly healthy. At his age, brain structures are still immature. The child cannot restrain emotions because feelings, as a rule, cannot control even adults. My recommendations are a regime, reasonable demands, expanding boundaries, independence. Think about your parenting techniques. You may be overprotective and spoiling him. This may be the reason for selfish desires and refusal to consider others." Emily tried to follow the specialist's advice, but the situation continued to escalate. It was difficult for her to cope with the distortions in her son's behavior alone. She was falling down in the face of the difficulties that arose. Her position in the bank also required high concentration and great responsibility, and there was not enough time for everything. The woman tried to seek advice from her husband, but he became more and more distant from the family, justifying himself by being busy in the restaurant. The girl realized that their relationship was cracked and tried to improve it in every possible way. But all her attempts to call her husband for a frank conversation failed. Ethan carefully avoided her society, became withdrawn, almost did not live at home. One evening, she was expecting to come home from work. She decided to cook him an unusual dinner, took time off work, and all day ran around the stores, choosing the right products, assessing their freshness and quality. Then she spent a long time conjuring up gourmet dishes in the kitchen, satisfied that she had gotten everything just right. She set the table in the hall, lit the candles, and put on her dress. Ethan returned frowning and tired. He looked indifferently at his wife and at the set table and sat down to eat, a little dryly, thanked Emily, and went to the bedroom. "Are you leaving?" The woman was surprised. Ethan turned to her and she was horrified by the expression on his face. Indifference and detachment were written all over it. "What? I'm leaving for someone else. I won't tell you who she is so as not to complicate your life. She's beautiful, she's smart, she loves me. We share the same interests. We understand each other half a word. I know I'll be happy with her." "I don't understand," horrified, whispered Emily. "You and I are over. Without aggravating everything with tears and scandals. Everything has long been clear. Neither I nor you have any feelings. Let's part in a civilized manner and keep in touch as needed." For Michael's sake, Ethan turned around and walked away. A quarter of an hour later, he slammed the front door shut behind him. Emily remained seated at the festive table, more and more sinking into the ringing silence of the night. She sat like that until dawn. Before her eyes flashed the image of a young husband in love, his words of love, warm embrace, and a hot kiss. Scraps of talk about the unity of their souls. How did this happen? Had he forgotten what had happened between us? Why did he betray me? Am I such a bad wife? Why didn't I see those warning bells? Why did I overlook my unhappiness? And yet he could so easily see someone else's. Ethan, you so easily erased the past, present, and future like an eraser. As she thought, her eyes fell on the phone display. There was a call from her husband. The woman grabbed the receiver and asked hopefully, "Did you change your mind? Will you come back?" "I knew it. It's unthinkable. I just got carried away. We can't be apart." "No, I haven't changed my mind. Don't give me those bar gigs. Everything passes, everything ends. Why would I want to live with someone I don't love? I'm a successful man, and I can afford to make my own rules." "Well, we love you. We can't live without you. You don't know how bad we feel. You're cutting us to pieces. Family is sacred. But who put that in your head? Forget me and live your life. There'll be someone else who'll make you happy. I don't need a man. I haven't always needed one. Only you, tiredly answered Emily. I don't know what to tell you, sighed the man. Maybe it will comfort you somewhat, but I'll leave you the apartment. It's what my parents wanted. They're very upset, of course, but I'll file for divorce myself. Goodbye. Emily clutched the phone frantically in her hand. It was ringing. The woman collapsed exhausted, right on the floor. She moaned long and hard. Then she curled up and lay still for hours. Emily Macduff felt nothing, neither tired, nor cold, nor hungry. She found her strength and made it to the bedroom. She lay down on the bed, closed her eyes, and lost touch with reality. During the night, she woke up with a renewed rush of nostalgia, as if in a kaleidoscope of flashing memories. It seemed to her that it was impossible to forget. Betrayal all the more impossible. Her heart pounded frantically. Her temples clenched and a lump rose in her throat in a silent scream. Her soul was dying. So her husband disappeared from their lives, dissolved in space and time. He faithfully paid alimony for his son, but by and large was no longer interested in Michael's life, although occasionally called the child and took him to visit. Through her acquaintances, Emily learned that he was living with a restaurant administrator. Handsome, young, adventurous. Michael was 8. When the divorce happened, he saw his father's act as a betrayal. But he felt his mother was to blame too. But what shocked him most was the collapse of their financial well-being. Emily, though and well-earned, but could not satisfy the increasing demands of her son. From what he threw tantrums and capricious on any occasion. In his teenage years, Michael completely distanced himself from his mother and completely immersed in a dissolute life. For him, firmly entrenched the reputation of slackers. At school, he was called truant and bandit. In addition, the guy's psyche began to unravel. He constantly quarreled with his parents, emotionally blackmailed them, threatening suicide. Then he got friends from the criminal world. Emily did everything she could to get her son out of bad company, ripped off the phones of parents, ran to pubs and dance clubs, dragged him drunk out of cars and hotel rooms. But no worries, and even more reasonable maternal arguments did not touch, and in Michael's heart only his own selfish demands worried him. He always talked about his father through his teeth, and his mother was not even a dime a dozen. Left after the departure of her husband's health, Emily even more undermined the son's antics. She became so mentally exhausted that chronic illnesses made themselves known. All at once, the woman, as if immediately panic shrunk from a beautiful and full of vitality beauty, turned into a prematurely established lady. Long evenings alone in an empty apartment, the woman walked from corner to corner. She sometimes looked out the window, nourishing a faint hope that her son would wake up and get wise. Emily began to suffer from insomnia, so she often spent nights thinking about why she had suffered such a fate, what she had done wrong when she missed her son, what and where she was wrong, and why she could not stop him. And the more she thought about it, the more she doubted the rightness of her actions, and the more she was tormented by doubts. But it was all in vain. I had to see and recognize the coming trouble. The praised skills of the detective failed me. I thought, woman, I should have known what was happening. I should have prevented it. From the maid's thoughts, she was a little distracted by her job. She was in demand there until she retired, but she still had to leave. She could have worked harder, but she was asked to give up her place to someone she knew. Emily did not return to her village until she was of retirement age. Her parents were long gone. Michael grew up and settled down, married a good girl. His family was waiting for the birth of a daughter. Ethan, the former husband, helped his son to get a job in a prestigious company. But the understanding between him and Emily never came through. Michael didn't seem to be hiding anything from her. He kept her in the loop, but he was cool. He didn't visit much. Camille was the only one who kept in touch, a kind and sweet girl. When Emily returned to her native land, she became younger and younger. The path to the house was overgrown with grass, and in the neighboring yard still with a dozen chickens running at the head of a cheeky rooster and a goat. And the woman? What do you want? You're looking for someone. There's no one in the house. Emily hears the voice of her classmate. Nancy's head whipped around nicely. Nancy. Nancy didn't recognize God's you I didn't recognize, but sat so how. We've been watching the house. Thank you. Let's go to our hut from the road. I'll make you some tea or some freshly brewed chicha. Oh, I wouldn't say no to a hot one. You'll tell me how things are going in Malinovka. Koroshilov's house was clean and cozy. The hostess Emily was hospitable and told me all the rumors, and so quickly got into the fate of the inhabitants, and in a week became for all her native. However, the new district officer laughed at her and was skeptical of her talents. He was aware that in Malinovka lived such a girl Pinkerton in a skirt. But it seemed to him that it was all in the past. Noah had already served in the organs for many years and considered personal experience as the basis of his activity. He respected only his own opinion and rarely listened to others. Only an accident made him believe in Emily's outstanding abilities and reconsider his views on life. One weekend, he went fishing and stayed overnight at the pond. While there, all the appliances, refrigerator, freezer, camera, TV, microwave, tablet, and $20,000 in cash were taken from his house. The man's hair just stood on end when he saw that the lock on his house was broken and the rooms were empty. He started asking around, but no one saw anything. Despite Noah's dislike, Emily in his beak brought him some interesting information. She chatted with his neighbors and as if casually asked leading questions. In the end, one of them told that he had heard the rumble of a car that night and looked out his window and saw a certain group of people entering the yard of the neighborhood. And another villager had noticed several strange cars in the village the day before. They sped past him towards the street where Noel lived, and he noticed that one of them had a sticker with an island and a palm tree on it. The policeman thanked Emily, and then went through the people and asked who had visitors. On such and such a car, on such and such a car. He found a person who had been visited by friends from the city, and then he made inquiries and found out that one of them had only recently been released from prison. After that, the criminals were quickly identified, arrested and sent to the detention center. Precinct officer, from the bottom of his heart, was grateful to Emily for the thread he got from her in the investigation, and later they became friends. Noah often availed himself of her hints, advice, and reflections. The precinct officer soon had a wife coming in from out of town, so the main center for solving mysteries and finding criminals was stationed at the Macduff house. For the first time in many years, Emily met a man she could trust. She let go of old grudges against her husband, healed mental wounds to fellow villagers. The woman did not like to answer questions about her son. They got used to Michael not coming. They thought he had abandoned his mother. So out of sight, out of mind. But for the mother's soul, this question was disturbing and painful. So the district officer saw that some longing is eating the heart of his colleagues. Even an inadvertently spoken word about Michael instantly stirred Emily. Such sadness appeared in her eyes that the man averted his gaze. And then one day she opened up to her friend. Sometimes she'd howl at the moon. I told you alone. I only reveal my heartache. I go into the house, and there's silence. Loneliness. I remember how I used to take my son to the matinees. I didn't sleep at night when he was sick. What fun. My family and I used to play soccer in the yard. I revisit the photos on them with bated breath. It's impossible to look at any photo. He's smiling everywhere. Sometimes I even cry. I can't get enough of him. Well, Emily, my soul, tears can't help sorrow. Let's fix up your place a little, and I'll help you. But we'll take our minds off it. Slowly, like a phoenix from the ashes. Emily Macduff's soul revived. The policeman turned out to be a jack of all trades, went to see her for a month with his four-legged friend. The dog is a former, and the warriors served in a hot spot, but on wounding was written off. His comrade Noah imposed him. The latter did not particularly sympathize with animals, but Sirius loved firmly. The clever sheepdog accompanied him on hunting and fishing trips. Finally, Emily's house came to life. A smile appeared on the woman's face. She had forgotten what kind of smile she had, and life began to fill up again. And then, unexpectedly, happiness came. When Michael had a daughter, he, and warmed to his mother, stopped blaming her for divorcing his father. I see he realized how difficult it is to be a parent. Now he was frank with her, and she could not condemn her son. She herself had such a love in adulthood, it was breathtaking. True, in this relationship, she did not betray anyone, although it was not easy to call them simple. After her son's visit, Emily called Camille and invited her to visit with Jenna. She gladly agreed. She liked to visit her mother-in-law, to help and just to talk. Her mother had abandoned her as a child. When she was a baby, she was raised by her father. Emily's daddy was a world, supported her in everything, as she pulled her one only God knows. Camille remembered his story about how carelessly her mother had thrown her from his arms. Father that night could not sleep for a long time. An inexplicable anxiety would not let go of his heart, slammed the book shut. He pulled the blanket over his head, trying to sleep, but instead he listened intensely to the dying silence. The doorbell rang. Jacob shuddered with his whole body and went to open it. Molly stood on the doorstep. She looked stylish. She had become a dazzling beauty. Jacob noticed she was wearing expensive clothes, diamond earrings, and a ring. It seemed that her life had turned out the way she wanted it to, with a rich suitor only in the eyes of her ex-wife. There was such a gaping emptiness that Jacob had a chill on his heart when she entered the apartment. He saw that Molly was cradling an infant. "Well, hello, husband," she said with a mocking tone. "Here, take your treasures. You wanted it, didn't you?" She handed him the bundle. "This is your daughter. I wanted to give her up in the hospital, but then I changed my mind and decided to give her to you. Remember when we were young and in love? You dreamed of having a baby. Right after the divorce, I realized you were pregnant with this newborn of your dream. And I don't want her. I don't want anyone. It's you. You're the one who stole my right to a life of security. I fell for your good looks. You're a beggar, a simple construction worker. I was a fool. For God's sake, Molly. Gone, Jacob. Have I ever denied you anything? How can you abandon a little child? She was just born. What have I ever done to you? I worked 2 jobs. I've been working shifts and going to covens. Did I ever hurt you? What about the fact that I didn't ask you for money? No money. So I had to earn it myself." Jacob seemed that Molly enjoys, morally mocking him. Her cruel words deeply wounded his heart. "You're going to die like this, my sweetheart," he sighed. "Stay with me. We'll raise a coin. You can still be happy. Molly, there's still time to live as a human being." "No, I can't anymore. Like everyone else. I'm already dead," replied the young woman. "I can't seem to see my happiness. I guess it's not our destiny to find it. And this button, too, is a curse that will be enough for all of us. My word is ironclad. You want to keep the girl, and you don't want to put her in an orphanage." Jacob cuddled the little one to herself. "Yes, I'll take her. I won't refuse." Molly left him with a scornful look and left the apartment. Jacob hugged the girl, nuzzled her cheek, and, closing his eyes, breathed deeply to calm himself. The resentment was choking him. He felt in the little girl a kindred soul. 2 lonelinesses have found each other, the man thought. What am I going to do with you? What kind of educator am I? Where do I start? He looked at the girl. The baby sang peacefully in her sleep. The father's heart squeezed with pity, love, and emotion. Jacob carried the girl to the bedroom, laid her on the bed, and opened the warm eggs. The newborn did not move. Her son was sweet and not vicious. He lay down beside her and forgot himself in a disturbing dream. Heavy thoughts ran through the man's mind one by one about how he could raise his daughter. The salary was small, and he is now unlikely to see. and she would certainly not help them. But God gave Jacob both strength and means to bring up his daughter. He could not help but admire her with his joy. She grew up serious and thoughtful, although withdrawn herself, did not show attention to anyone or peers in the sandbox, did not communicate, but shared toys at the first request, will move away from the noisy kids, standing, watching peers, or as birds soaring in the sky from the side. She seemed a small, quiet, dreamy loner, afraid of the environment and communication. But that impression was deceptive. But everyone had long ago made sure that Camille was not afraid of her cats, wolves, monsters, and ghosts, nor boys of any age. Once Kolka Amosov decided to take away one boy's bicycle by force without his consent. Despite the fact that James was older than the children gathered on the playground, Camille confidently walked up to him, touched his arm, and in a tone that did not tolerate objections, said, "Get away from the man and his bike. Otherwise I'll cut you." That from surprise let go of his handbike and asked, "You what a long time has not received a pendle under the asswant. If I dare to touch any of us, I'll beat you up." Camille picked up a big stick from the ground. Amosov looked at the girl's formidable look and retreated. "Fuck you." And Camille, as if nothing had happened, returned to her favorite place, on a bench under the shade of a birch tree, and concentrated on contemplating nature and her thoughts. From that time on, neither James nor the other bullies who wanted to mock the little ones behaved properly. And at school, Camille was quiet, and she was average. She simply, by virtue of her peculiar dreamy, verse lessons, flew far away from what was happening in the classroom. Time flew by, and she grew into a grown-up girl. She was simple at heart and not fastidious in everyday life. She stood out among her peers, outwardly blonde and dark-skinned, tall and slender, with her head held high and impeccable posture. She was not at all like her mother. The girl had evidently inherited her father's character. She was very reserved, filled with a sense of inner dignity, pedantic and brave. One thing that marred the Dumas Jacob was that the daughter had practically no suitors. Such a girl that it seems that she beckoned her boyfriend, he and will run like socks presented. No to look back for a look back. And no serious relationships. The standards of upbringing that her father gave her were different from modern ones. The girl seemed to her peers a bit of an oddball cotton candy. Her good-naturedness, openness, naivety were taken for weakness. The boys in the class grew up impertinent and selfish. They didn't know how to be friends, gathering in interest groups to show off their ambitions. Camille was too delicate a flower. All those husks flew off her. She had no desire to stand out, humiliating others, and over the head of her neighbor to step over or bite into a person with her teeth to achieve her own. This unconventionality attracted older people, wise in life, but young people were repulsed and frightened. Her image, as if descended from the movie screens, beckoned its appeal, but also required an understanding of the work of the heart and mind. Relationships with such a girl could not be easy, so modern guys were afraid to approach her. Jacob shared his concerns with his friends. "Don't even think about it," they reassured him, but no luck with James. "They'll meet some decent ones. There are some. Have faith, and don't think she's weak. The girl's got a lot of self-esteem. She won't just mess around with such shallow and rude men." Ah, bad luck for the daughter. Just like me in my day. How did she leave? The door closed behind her. I never saw her again. She showed up once, brought her daughter, dropped her off, and disappeared. I only contact her once in a while for paperwork or anything else. But to come and talk to her? No, it is not a royal matter, summarized the man. What was Jacob's surprise when the next day Molly appeared on the doorstep of his apartment. It was difficult to recognize the woman. There was nothing left of her former beauty. Swaggering and untidy, she walked into the kitchen. Camille was sitting there, drawing something in her sketchbook. "There's your mom." "Hello," she said in a low voice. "Remember me?" The girl raised her head and looked the woman straight in the eyes. "I am grateful to you for bringing me into the world, but my father raised me, so he is my only parent. It's only fair." The girl went back to her drawing. He's the one who raised you, so he didn't raise you well. If you from your own mother, then I'm no longer needed. I don't think you'll be able to make me mad. I think I told you everything, the girl replied calmly. Jacob, Jacob. Molly jumped out of the kitchen like a scalded man. Who did you bring up here? Look, snot. She's criticizing her own mother. What happened to you? What's going to happen to you? Who's going to feed her? She laughed. She'll get an education and feed herself. She's grown up now. How are you behaving? You stink like a beer barrel, don't you? Why don't you go back to where you came from? I'm entitled to my drinks. You don't forget yourself. When I take that girl away from you, you'll know it. What are you talking about, Molly? She's an adult. You can't pick up an independent person. She's not gonna live with a bunch of your men. In fact, the man waved his hand squeamishly at her nose. That's all right. I didn't really want to. Molly took a few potential money bills out of her pocket and tossed them in the air. Then here's your graduation present. Take it for God's sake. For so many years, I didn't want to help my daughter with a penny or an endorsement. What's the point now? What are you teaching me? The woman pounded her chest, and I'm a mother. I do what I want. You're nothing. What have you done for your daughter? Actually, I raised her. When the senseless sheep, Molly laughed vulgarly. Did you ever choke on your anger? Jacob said sadly. Yes, I am what I am. I won't be any different. It's your fault I'm like this. You've robbed me of everything. It's no use arguing with you. I won't prove anything to you, and I have no guilt against you. Wow, you've become so proud when we talk. Why should I be? All right, you live here. I will. Molly suddenly started crying. They'll be alone. Nobody needs them. I kicked the kitchen door open, and it slammed against the wall. But not yet. The woman waved a hand with a lost manicure at Camille. Goodbye, the girl said politely, continuing to draw. Soon Camille started to study at the institute. She chose the specialty of decorator. According to the points scored on the use she passed on the budget, the girl studied with great pleasure, showing patience and perseverance in mastering the chosen profession. From early childhood she liked to draw, and her bright, extraordinary works attracted the attention of tutors, teachers, and educators. Now she systematically went to her dream. With honors, having defended her diploma, the girl got a job in the theater. It was a youth theater, and therefore, there were many opportunities for creativity. Things had finally calmed down in an orderly fashion in her and her father's life, until Camille met Michael. It was springtime, when nature was in full bloom, and she wanted to run, arms outstretched, toward love, happiness, and joy. The scent of a white turtle wafted through the park. Near her favorite cafe on a bench sat a young, handsome man. Camille boldly stepped toward him. An oath? She asked. Sure, charmingly, the guy smiled. Camille introduced herself. The girl is wonderful, great name. And I'm Michael. Let's take a walk. He invited her. The girl agreed. They took hands, and until the evening could not agree with each other. Michael was interested in everything related to childhood and real life. He literally reveled in every word of her stories, and she admired his subtle sense of humor, charm, and tact. His appearance of tall stature with a political figure, dark hair, and Seneca movements of his were characterized by smoothness and not hurried, and speech was ardent and inspired. From the first minute of meeting, he captured Camille's attention, provoked her to frankness, won her trust. It seemed that these two were made for each other. Even when they were silent, they were comfortable together. Each was thinking about his own and at the same time admiring his partner. Suddenly, a powerful downpour fell on the city, and the couple got soaked. Michael did not want to part, and he offered Camille to take a hot shower at his house. They held hands and ran down the street, bravely stepping into large puddles. In the apartment ripened from under the slender hot water, the girl dived into a spacious man's robe and came out of the bathroom, continuing to warm up. The guy brought champagne glasses from the kitchen. Camille emptied hers with pleasure. She rarely drank alcohol, but in the company of a handsome young man she relaxed completely. She drank the second glass, slowly savoring the taste and aroma of the drink. The hop hit her head, and Michael charmed her more and more at the moment when he hugged and kissed her. The girl completely melted. His touch stupefied Camille, and she gave herself to her lover with all passion. "I love you," whispered Michael, caressing the girl. "I'm so happy that we met, but unfortunately we have to part. I have to go away for a few days." Michael exclaimed, "Girl, but you'll be back soon." "Yes. I'd like you to wait for me." "Oh, yes." Camille pressed herself against him. He squeezed her tightly in his arms. "Will you wait for me?" "Yes. You promise?" "I swear." At dawn, Camille woke up in the arms of her lover. She was happy. Despite her boyfriend's frequent business trips, they were always in touch. They got married. For the celebration, Camille chose a white dress in the floor decorated with a feather, arranged her hair in a high hairstyle, and decorated it with a live rose. She applied light makeup and Abdullah boat shoes and high-heeled boat shoes. The groom was paid in a classic black suit. When the wedding delegation arrived, the employees of the wedding palace were frankly surprised at such a small company, although they had been warned in advance that there would be few guests. Emily and Jacob, mother of the groom and father of the bride. The ceremony was touching and simple. Like all lovers, Camille and Michael kissed under the waltz of Mendelssohn. After the official part, the company went to the city park for a walk. Only then was a modest home-cooked dinner planned. And all was well with them. Okay, problems were solved together. Until Evelyn invaded their lives. Camille opened her eyes abruptly. The woman was pulled out of the world of memories by the sudden braking of the train. They arrived in Malinovka on the village. It was evening. The summer heat was dropping off. The wind played large trees and spread the smell of fresh, dull grass on the street. My mother-in-law's house was open, but she wasn't in the house. Neighbors said they had seen her walking toward the new cemetery. Camille left it in the yard and followed Emily up the road. She remembered that the day was a Memorial Day. Her mother-in-law was standing by the grave, on which lay a bouquet of fresh chrysanthemums. Camille approached her from the monument, watching the face of a handsome gray-haired man who had lived for 60 years. She had never met one like this around her mother-in-law. "Sit down next to her." Leshka moved over. "I'm ashamed to ask, but what about Michael?" "He's gone with Evelyn to the sea." "That's Emily," she sighed. "I have a conversation with you, girl. I need to pour out my soul. It's okay now." She looked sadly at the gravestone. "But I will also give you some advice. I'll take it from you. I'm not shy. I'll start. Here rests a man dear to me. He died suddenly, 5 years ago. And all these years I've been coming to him in the evenings when people aren't around. This is my secret love. Marriage. As you know, I married with great feeling. Ethan was charming, smart, kind, even though men looked up to me. And I never imagined cheating on my husband. And even after the divorce, he left me without regret. And I couldn't do it with other people. I dared to. And then I met Noah. I'm not young. And he's a mature man. Married, 2 sons. And he didn't like me at first. But then he took a friendly liking to me. Such a warm and mesmerizing feeling was born, as if we were born for each other. We were so good together. Our souls sang. I did not feel the ground under me from love. I was flying. And he always supported me in that flight. Often, too often, and sincerely, he said, "You are the most delightful and tender woman. Having met by fate, I marvel at everything about you. Intelligence and the ability to experience deeply." It didn't take us long to realize that we were both in trouble. At first, it was only our common cause that brought us together. We thought our hearts would calm down a little and the amazing attraction would fade. But soon it became clear that neither I nor he has no power over feelings. We started dating and later confessed their love to each other. But I did not wish his family grief, and no one still does not know about what happened between us. How happy we were that our hearts beat side by side, that we breathed the same air, looking into our favorite eyes. And then, out of the blue, Noah suddenly fell ill and died. He took with him to his grave the secret of his relationship with me. I keep it a secret. You know, you're the only one I've been feeling bad about not saying hello to lately. I've been silent for a long time, and now you can't. And I want to share. And you're the only person I have left who's close to me. A holy man who's not mad at me for my son. Come on, Emily. You're like a mother to me. Thank you, baby, and call me Mom. Please. And now I'm going to say something very important in your ear. Why in your ear? So that not even the spirits can hear us. She leaned over to me. Camille pressed closer to the woman, and she told her thoughts. Let's go home. Mom, Camille gave her a hand, and they walked slowly toward the village. By the road, each one was thinking about his own thoughts. The next day, her ex-husband appeared at the doorstep of Emily's house. He had aged, but he had not lost his status and charm. Emily had been very nervous the day before and felt thin. She had been lying down all day. Camille had barely persuaded her to have some fresh chicken broth and breadcrumbs. But when she heard that Ethan was waiting for her outside, she found the strength to go out. They settled on a bench in the courtyard, staying within sight of Camille and Jenna, who was bustling about in the kitchen. I've only had happy years with you. I realize that only now, when my whiskey has had the break of a lifetime, the man began. Will you ever forgive me? I let it go a long time ago, Ethan. Resentments no longer trouble my weary heart. I live in harmony with myself. I appreciate the diamond dew of the morning dew, the gold of autumn, the countryside. A strong gust of wind threw leaves on their shoulders. Thunder rumbled. The rain began to accumulate. Ethan lifted the collar of his cloak and looked sadly into the sky. God only knew how bitterly the man regretted his betrayal and what had happened to Michael because of it. His conscience tormented him. He repented, cursed his short-sightedness, hated himself. At times, life seemed unpleasant. After all, before his son he was guilty, and this sin is forever and has no statute of limitations. It's a pity I realized late. I grew up late and wanted to take responsibility for what I had done. And here's how it turned out now, and Michael from the family refuses to loyal and selfless Camille from a beautiful daughter Jenna. It must be his messed up paternal genes. He looked at Emily, gazed at the painfully familiar features, remembered the adoration with which she had once looked at him. In an instant, he had scrolled back through their entire life as if in a kaleidoscope. His heart squeezed and tears spurted from his eyes. He gently took his ex-wife's hand and kissed it gently. You and Michael, the best thing I've ever had in my life, he confessed. Emily smiled at him brightly and calmly. It's getting late. I have to go. She stood up and moved forward. Turning away from Ethan, the woman went back into her world. The elder Macduff had left Malinovka the younger with a sprawling vacation on the sea. Michael seemed overwhelmed by love. Near Evelyn, birch sea, dolphins, palm trees. The weather was very good. From time to time, a light and pleasant breeze from the hotel window saw the sea waves gently foaming on the shore. All this hinted at Michael an unusual feeling, previously unknown. Now he believed in his happy future with all the fibers of his soul. He hoped that all his wish would come true, and Evelyn would become his lawful wife. He openly admired this beauty. The woman stood on the balcony in a light balloon, and the wind contemplated her beautiful face and marvelous figure. Michael left the room for a moment and returned with a beautiful bouquet, and his delivery cell phone had just arrived. The man held it out to Evelyn. "This I hope you like," he said. "Thank you so much. It's so nice. I love white roses." "How did you guess?" "Well, I'm not gonna lie. I went with my gut. I knew you'd like it." Michael smiled. "Did you succeed? I'm glad, aren't I? Let's go for a walk." Evelyn changed into a light cotton suit. She took him under her arm, and they headed for the sea. Michael felt like it was a special moment. In a few minutes, they were already standing on the beach, and the pianos of the waves caressed their bare feet. Evelyn, I should have told you this a long time ago, but I couldn't gather my thoughts. I always need a long preparation in any business. It's weird, isn't it? Yeah, a little. Now, this may sound cliched or contrived, but I'm saying this from the bottom of my heart, and from the bottom of my heart, you're the love of my life. I've been attracted to you since the first day I met you. You don't know how happy I am to hear you say that. I like you a lot too, and I guess I can tell. Evelyn slyly eyes. God, today is a great day in my life. To hear words of love from someone who is immensely dear. My feelings at this moment are indescribable. Michael put his arm around her waist, and they slowly began to move through the sand, leaving their footprints. He stopped, standing very close to Evelyn. Their lips touched in a tender kiss. A thought ran through Michael's mind. This is what I've been waiting for. This must be the happiness that so many people talk about, and so few people have really felt it. Evelyn pulled away from him slightly. But if you're counting on me marrying you, it's unlikely. Do you understand? Even though I like you very much, I don't want to belong to anyone else. And that's why I have to set the record straight. Even if you and I are together on a permanent basis, I'll have other affairs from time to time. I need to be reaffirmed in my attractiveness. And in general, I want freshness, feelings, and relationships. To say that Michael was surprised is to say nothing. He was dumbfounded, and his heart grew heavy. How was it to share the woman he loved with someone like that? He couldn't imagine it, but no objections, or are we breaking up? And with a flirtatious gait, Evelyn moved forward. Michael from the mountains, having gotten rid of his unpleasant thoughts, followed her. And Emily, Jenna, and Camille enjoyed the simplicity of country life. Summer was in full swing. The yard was drowned in emerald green, and in the middle of it stood 3 willows, under their tennis crowns, and put a round table of chairs. In the evenings they gathered there to share local news, play cards or dominoes. Time ticked away quietly and measuredly. Emily was no longer in a hurry to learn new things about her fellow countrymen. Age was taking its toll. With it came illnesses. They took a lot of strength. Now the woman rarely left the house. Only in the evenings at the cemetery, passing acquaintances, she said good evening, and without stopping, went on her way. How quiet has she become? People wondered. How nosy she used to be. She knew everything about everyone. She solved crimes. One evening, when Camille and Jenna went swimming at the river, the men at the local cannon noticed, found something, and left the porch light on. As usual, they went into the yard and called out to the woman. No one responded. One of them grabbed the handle. The door fell off. They found themselves inside. They turned on the light and found the woman unconscious. They deftly picked her up and lifted her up, put her on the sofa. We immediately called an ambulance. The paramedic arrived, quickly put an IV, gave an injection, and took her to the hospital. Emily stayed there for 3 days. Camille and Jenna visited her, brought her fresh soups, fruit. But after signing a waiver of hospitalization, she returned home. Camille was surprised to see a cab outside the gate. "Mom, why did you run away?" "They said you needed to lie down. At least for 2 weeks. I don't want to." "Me, Emily. Everything in the hospital is foreign to me. It's so depressing. I'm going to be treated here in my own home. No offense, girls, but that's my will." On her return, the woman went out every day to sit under the willows. She read aloud short stories and novels. Poems told interesting situations from the lives of famous people, rulers, composers, generals, writers. A little about myself, about my family, about my parents, about funny incidents from my childhood. "Joy, my favorite girls." With excitement, she said, "How good it is with you, warmly, cozily, calmly." Camille noticed that in a few days Emily lost weight, more often lay down and was silent, and looking at her, quite dejected. She tried to take good care of her mother-in-law. Pillows softer to fluff. Soup tastier, boil more. tell her stories more cheerfully. "Forgive me, Camille, will you take care of the flowers when I'm gone?" She told her. "Why are you scaring everyone? Maybe we should go back to the hospital. I don't have any pain in my daughter, except for my soul. I'm longing for my beloved." And something from the beginning. She sighed heavily. Suddenly her eyes came alive. She lifted her head from the pillow and looked sternly at Camille. "And take my advice. Consider it my will." You realize what she was in front of, and she rolled onto Jenna, who was sitting next to her. "I promise you'll do it. I promise you." The young woman lowered her eyes. "Though it is not my style, I will do as you believe." One afternoon, Emily rose from her bed with the first rays of the sun. She walked around the yard, looking at her gorgeous flower bed and lovely garden. She came to the booth, scratching behind the ears of the young puppy she had named Sirius in honor of her beloved man's faithful friend. That dog had died before his master. "Come on, Sirius, grow up here, be a good guard, and don't forget me and don't miss me. Obey the club, and I will." The sheepdog clung to her leg and sang pitifully, and Emily, losing his nose, headed for the door of the house. Her favorite girls were still asleep that early morning. She sat down on the bed with a few precise movements, kicked out a pillow and lay down, closing her eyes. And a few moments later, she left this world. There was an envelope on the nightstand next to her. In it, she asked to be buried next to Noah's grave and made arrangements for her estate. She wrote, "My dears, I feel the end approaching. I know Noah is waiting for me. They're beyond the line of existence, where no sickness or sorrow will be feared anymore. God gave me an amazing happiness later in life, but so enchanting. I have been loved myself. I have known true filial love. I am respected by an amazing young woman. Comfort and light in the face of the ring. I have had a complicated relationship with my dear son. There were both downs and ups, but he chose his own destiny. I guess it's time for him to take responsibility for it. And I want to help my favorite girls. That's why I got an apartment in the city and a house in the countryside. I'm leaving all my savings to Camille Macduff. I bequeath to my son to cultivate the best human qualities of love, generosity, soul, mutual understanding, unselfishness, and find true happiness, to understand the values of loyalty and devotion." Finding the breathless bodies of their mothers-in-law, Camille and Jenna cried long and unsuccessfully. After calming down a little, the young woman sent her husband a message. In it, she avoided him about the death of Emily, and also attached a screen with her farewell letter. Michael did not look at the phone screen for a long time, and could not realize that his mother's heart was no longer beating. He never had time to say the right words to her about his love, to ask for forgiveness, and to be attentive. Her last will took the man in a stupor. Would he now need to rent a place to live with Evelyn, or ask his father for help again? Either way, back in town, he needed to clear the living space of his own belongings, and yes, file for divorce. Evelyn didn't go with him to the funeral, saying she wasn't going to interrupt a pleasant vacation. She arrived afterward and settled into Michael's apartment. Camille did not hurry to evict them, but once visited her rival when her husband was not at home. She was so surprised to see her that she lost her temper, knowing that Camille was the true owner of the apartment. "Hello," Macduff said hello, and turned to Evelyn with a smile. "We need to talk. Let's go for a walk. Get some fresh air." She furrowed her brow and pretended that she had nothing to talk to Camille about. "Who are you?" "Unleashed," she said, "for me to walk down the street with you. I'm still Michael's wife. I think you remember our meeting outside the store over 6 months ago." "Oh well. What happened?" Reluctantly, the woman slipped her sweater over her shoulders, and they walked down to the courtyard together. Evening. Dark clouds were gathering over the city. "Look, it's going to rain, and you still have to get to the village. Why did you come all this way? You can't change anything. Michael loves me. As he loves me, so he loves me," Camille said. "I've got some dirt on you." She took a small folder out of her purse. It contained compromising photographs. The woman showed them to her rival. These are illustrations of your licentious life and secret profession. You'll recognize them. Recognize. The woman was dumbfounded. Where did you get them? I can't answer that question. I don't know. My mother-in-law gave them to me. She spent her whole life unraveling crime and could smell deception a mile away. How did Emily get these photos? I don't know, but I do know that I'm gonna show them to Michael and maybe post them on social media. But if we don't work out a deal, of course, grinned Camille. So what do you want? Evelyn asked her. Don't you have any idea? Get out of Michael's life. Did you have bad luck with his mother? She picked up on the falseness right away. Realized you were looking for easy, short-lived affairs. You decided to have fun with Michael too. Knowing that he has been in love with you since high school, it's not fair to use a man's feelings for your whim and thus deprive your daughter of a father. Is it good for your son to grow up without a father? For your son, I think, loves his father as much as our Jenna loves my husband. You won't get yourself in those by freeing him from your yoke. Camille stepped firmly toward Evelyn, but she bounced away from her like a fire about to burn her to the ground. You calm down. You're right about everything. I'm leaving him now. Just don't show these pictures to anyone. You can admire them as much as you like. She was right. Your mother-in-law. Only I never hid my attitude. And Michael told me that I would date other men too. He was willing to do anything, even humiliate me, to be with me. So it's not me. It's his heart. But I'm not ready to have a bad name spread all over the country about me. So you win. I'm out. Good. You made the right decision. The sooner you leave, the better for everyone. So one fine evening, Evelyn disappeared from Macduff's life as suddenly as she had entered it. Camille showed her husband the compromising photos, and he was quickly cured of his all-consuming passion. Camille returned to him for the sake of his daughter, and Michael behaved with them as if nothing had happened. However, the young woman realized that quiet family happiness was a thing of the past. She protected her love, kicked out deceit with her mind, forgave her husband, but with her heart she did not. Unable to overcome herself, the woman sold all of Emily's inheritance and together with Jenna left town. Michael was not unhappy, repenting for leaving his family behind. Macduff Sr. provided him with a beautiful apartment in the center of the city and even gave him a small restaurant, and Emily was starting a new life and an old one. She regretfully remembered only the amazing kind eyes to her named mother Emily. Jenna took Camille's decision with understanding. She had seen her condition lately and herself felt badly about her father's act. However, she maintained relations with him, often called him, and learned about all his affairs. They bought a small with modern renovation house on the shore of the Azov Sea, often went out to admire the power and laser flights of waves. Emily loved to go to the shore in the morning to meet the dawn. She was excited by the appearance of the sun from the horizon. She watched it illuminate the shore and then the waves near her feet. The woman was held together by the invisible energy of nature. During the purchased season, she plunged into the water and swam toward the dawn, admiring the luminary and the way it was rising upwards, and already she generously gave her warmth to the sea and the earth. She was more fond of sunsets, dark red, lilac, pink, and orange. She would go into the warm water and admire the sun going behind the horizon. One day Emily, emerging from the sea element, felt her heart squeeze. She wanted to take a deep breath, but for some reason she could not. As she froze in place, she felt the frantic rhythm become normal, and she finally took a breath. But the situation strained her, so the woman went to the hospital for examination. At first, the doctors found no visible pathologies, and she thought that the condition was due to emotional excitement. But the pains began to bother her more and more often. Sometimes she had to leave work. It was especially hard at night, because she worked as a hotel receptionist. His woman did not talk about the pain in her heart, so as not to bother her, hoping that everything would pass. It didn't. She again went to the hospital, and a more complete examination showed the presence of coronary heart disease. Now it was necessary to get serious treatment. The disease progressed, and so she could no longer go to work or move around. One day, Camille came to see the sunrise again, but she did not dare to go into the water. The doctors warned her that she needed to reduce her workload, so she just stood on the shore, feeling the pleasant coolness of the water envelop her feet. The waves were small this day, but active, breaking in the shore with small splashes. She felt so pleasant and fresh from these drops of the vast sea that she laughed contentedly. "I see you like the sunrise on the sea surface and the morning freshness." Camille heard an unfamiliar male voice. She looked back. Nearby was a man about 30 years old. All wet from the water, the rising sun played in the water droplets on his body. The man's smile was surprisingly good, wide and open. "You don't be scared," he reassured. "I'm not scary, and I just love sea dawns too, but sunsets too. And of course, swimming in the sea." "I know what you mean," Camille nodded. "Only today the water is cold. But since we both like the same things, let's take a walk on the beach. You're not in a hurry." "No, I'm in no hurry now," sighed the woman. "The rules of good manners suggest that we should get to know each other. I'll introduce myself. My name is Sam." "I see you marveled at your pretty eyebrow and bent over." "Yes, I'm a bit of a foreigner. I'm originally from Yugoslavia, but we've lived here in the capital for a long time. I'm in computer technology. Today, unfortunately, I'm leaving you. So we're wandering on the water. As long as there is time to wander around, wander enthusiastically," agreed the young woman. "Yay, isn't it wonderful that I met you today? It's just magical." I took Camille by the hand, led her down the beach. They were silent because they were both enjoying being with nature. It didn't stop them from feeling comfortable, as if they had known each other for a long time. Camille's heart raced. She liked the man very much. It was as if he had read her thoughts. "You fascinated me too. I stood watching you for half an hour. The man slipped into you, but didn't dare approach. And then I overcame my fear. And now we're riding the waves with you. It's just a pity I have to leave today. But I hope you'll leave me your phone number and I'll leave you mine. We'll call each other." "I will." Camille agreed wholeheartedly. The woman was amazed that such an interesting man appeared in her life when she was so ill. The doctors advised her not to worry and certainly not to fall in love. After the meeting, Camille tried not to think about Sam and to occupy herself with other thoughts. But every day he knocked on her mind and then called her. And after that, they were constantly in touch. While he was out of town, she was examined several times and bypass surgery was advised. There was talk of a transplant, of illness. She didn't tell her new acquaintance anything because they didn't even have a serious relationship. She rejoiced at his every call, remembered the amazing meeting by the sea. And then he came and flew to the shore with a beautiful bouquet of flowers. He invited Camille to a wedding to a friend who lives here. "Olga, the fate of a comrade is being decided. And I'm a witness. They won't sign without me. But I don't want to go to the party. It won't be a party without you. So don't say no." Camille went with pleasure. She looked wonderful in a delicate ice dress and flesh-colored stiletto heels. "You are very beautiful." Sam admired her. He didn't leave her side at the wedding. And then she introduced him to her daughter. Jenna felt nervous and awkward for some reason. But the charm, ease of communication, and sincerity of the man melted her heart. And a few hours after meeting him, the girl was already laughing at his stories and felt quite liberated. I offered to take a ride in the wind in an open car. He'd rented it. I would have liked to go with them. But then she got a call from a boy she had liked for a long time inviting her for a ride, and the two of us went on the rides together, holding hands, laughing and smiling at each other. I stopped the car on the side of the road. Before them opened a vast sea, surrounded by majestic century-old trees. On the mountainside, the man drew Camille to him and kissed her tenderly, barely touching her, stroked her hair and smiled at that moment. He was dazzlingly good-looking, tall, slender-haired, confident. They got into the car again and rushed forward. It seemed that great happiness and a happy life together were ahead of them. Camille did not know that this trip would separate them forever. The last thing she remembered was a sharp turn and a truck coming at them. And then darkness, a long darkness, and a thin beam of light checking through it. Jenna's voice. "Mommy, Mommy, you finally opened your eyes." The concerned face of an aged father. "Daughter, did you have surgery?" "Don't worry. The doctor said it was a success." A few days later, Camille had the feeling of being split in two, as if there was another person living inside her. When the doctor came in for his rounds and she told him how she felt, it was as if I had been partially replaced. There were some thoughts that didn't seem to be mine, but somehow some of them were familiar. They are. But it's not you that's been replaced. It's your bad motor. You were fabulously lucky. The donor heart was a perfect match. Donor heart. It brought me new feelings and new thoughts. Yes, most people who live with a heart develop the habits, the abilities of a donor. What's your most acute sensation? That someone else's heart and my soul are one, as if with my own heart. I've had it many times, but there is more love, more tenderness in it. I don't know how to explain it. Scientists suggest that it's cellular memory, thoughts, memories, feelings are transmitted. But you only think that this man, whose heart beats in your chest now, gave you a chance for a full life, and take care of him. And who is this man? Sam. Camille clenched her eyes shut with emotion, and tears spurted from her eyes. He gave her his love and saved her life.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Stephen, or should I say Stephen, was always lonely, but he never blamed his loneliness on his pride and rigidity, which often turned into cruelty. "No, it's certainly not my character," did he think, when his son once again said how cruel this father was. He had heard such reproaches from people around him many times, starting with his son and ending even with the cleaning lady he had fired. He'd heard it before. "Son, you should have lived your life." That's when we talk. Mason, his son, and his joy. All that was left of his first wife, Nancy. They were a perfect couple, and from their childhood yard, not to mention the institute, the job in the prestigious foreign ministry, were not without the help of his father. Stephen got a job for both of them. Even then they were told that they could not find a better couple, and from the face of an uncle one could paint pictures or even icons. But a tragic accident cut short all the plans and hopes of the young. What's the matter with the intervention of the powers that be? The worst day of Stephen's life he always remembered. The road-wrecked wife's car and her body covered with a sheet. A trivial case, as the investigators said at the time, of a wet road. And there. But Stephen, who had already then reached considerable heights, the diplomat realized that it was not just that. It's just the officially approved version for the press or internal reports. But he's the one they want to remove from the political arena. And his wife's death is a warning. "Stephen, we certainly grieve with you and understand how much you loved our daughter," Nancy's father said. "But I beg you by God, we'll leave and from the ministry of the book and our grandson." Only then did the man realize how serious it was, since his father-in-law had already told him directly that it was time to leave and his grandson's life was at risk. "So you got a call too. James, you don't have to say anything, just nod your head, and that's it." But my father-in-law wouldn't say anything. He didn't even have the energy to nod. After his daughter's death, he just turned and walked away, leading his weeping wife by the hand. Since then, Stephen filed a report for dismissal for family reasons, and taking his son, simply left such a happy and prosperous Germany. "There's nothing for me to do here. Son, it's time to go home," he said to little Mason, sitting in the train that started for Moscow. "And what's there?" "Oh, come on. Nancy's father promised to get him a job in the ministry, so he won't be out of work for sure." And with his knowledge of language, diplomacy, and persuasive skills, Stephen was not afraid of being left without money, but apparently the diplomatic Olympus was not his destiny. To be more precise, his father-in-law immediately hinted to him about it. Having once invited a high ministerial department to his office, Stephen went up in the elevator and understood that the conversation would not be simple and not on simple topics. Since his father-in-law had summoned him to his office, "Stephen, you understand," the father-in-law began, looking at his son-in-law carefully. "James, is that you? If there's no room, just say so." "I understand." "No, Stephen, it's a different matter. There is a place, but the essence of your work is connected with something else, so to speak, with criminal elements." "What's that?" The young man was surprised beyond measure. "You almost forced me out of the offices of the German Foreign Ministry. You said it's dangerous for my grandson there. So here in the capital you told me about crime. Out of the fire and into the fire. I didn't know anything about it until the last minute. I only took over a couple months ago." The man stood up and went to the window, nervously began to smoke out the window and rub the tightly wrapped. He realized how ridiculous this all looked. But on the other hand, what could he do? Nothing. He was simply confronted with the fact that he either had a job and a well-fed, secure life, or he could settle disputes between criminals at the international level. Or I'll ask Monsieur to retire, so to speak. But after that, there's no guarantee we won't make the same offer to your son-in-law. And you have a grandson growing up. What's left of your daughter, so to speak? So, James, frankly, I don't understand. I'm willing to work here in the capital. But if it's dangerous here, is it worth it to change places? It was. And my father-in-law banged his hand on the windowsill, so hard that the glass ran down. They called me from the top, told me that you and I should be here. And you'll work here too. And when I'm gone, you'll take my place. And don't argue. Stephen understood, or rather, knew perfectly well how dangerous such political backstage games are. He also realized that if he wanted to be dragged into this game, he would be dragged in no matter how. So he just took a deep breath and sat down at the table opposite his father-in-law's chair. Quietly asked, "Well, suppose I agree. I'll work. So you at least tell me what is to be done." "That's a different conversation. I'll tell you briefly, and then you'll get involved." As the work progresses, so to speak, although the essence of his work was simple and clear, under the cover of diplomatic immunity to travel between countries, to help in the transportation of currency, diamonds, and even drugs, sometimes to help solve disputes between opposing criminal sides of his country, and so to speak, friendly in quotes state such an independent from the side, not interested in the result of the referee. And if his advice or word satisfies both sides, he gets his percentage and recognition in such a narrow circle. Yeah, James, you were friends, but you tell me, why should I have left Germany? You could do all this sitting in a cushioned armchair in Munich or Berlin. And here there are such passions. No, we need our presence here in the capital. That's why they killed Nadia. Couldn't they, these criminal bosses of yours? They could just tell Stephen, "Don't touch my soul. I'll do it myself." He asked why. Why couldn't the issue be resolved, so to speak, through negotiations, but he didn't get an answer. What does it matter now? Nancy, no. Maybe he didn't want to. Or was he learning to leave? Who knows? And here they've decided everything in one fell swoop. Say, Stephen, let's not bring it up. You and I have been clearly shown that they are the authorities, and we are nobody. And we should listen to them. Otherwise, they'll kill us. Mason, I hear you. Yeah, you're right. I hope you realize the danger. It's been many years since that moment. And now Stephen has already become a respected man, a retired diplomat, and a shadow referee at the meetings of the strong international criminal world. Even at the very beginning, he asked his father-in-law that, say, they have their own laws. Why would they bring in diplomats? Stephen, you understand, it's one thing for them to solve their issues according to their rules. But it's another if the solution of the dispute is backed up by the words of a diplomat. It's like God's blessing. And it's always at a meeting to solve other organizational issues of transportation. Okay, that I'm making friends with you now with these moments. Just take it on faith. And whether or not I agreed, what was there left to do? Wait for him to be pinned down. Whether by threats or persuasion is not so important. It does. He's got to get back on his feet, but he can't go into politics. Although Mason didn't really want to be. But as time went on, Stephen took his father-in-law's place at the embassy, dealing with criminal masterminds. Yeah, he almost became a criminal mastermind himself. And all thanks to his intelligence and ability to persuade and solve the most intricate issues. Stephen was invited to every serious convention. Yes, Stephen San, your intelligence and cunning can be envied even by the great Mongol himself. Thank you, Mr. Jacob. Jacob was a recognized authority, known in certain circles as Tarek, in charge of Mongolian criminal matters. If he recognized Stephen's authority, it was worth a lot. It's not praise, it's recognition of your talent. You know, some people call me cruel. But what do you say to that? In our world, cruelty is the destiny of the wise and great, but it is not in your words and deeds. Yes, it's more the province of the weak. Thank you again. But it didn't help me keep my wife, and it won't help me get her back now. I've heard of your grief. I grieve with you, honored one. But I'll speak on my behalf. You have a smart and handsome son. May Allah grant him many years. Don't forget about him. By the way, how is he doing? I hear he graduated high school with honors. He'll probably follow in his father's footsteps. No, Jacob. He's decided to go to medical school, but he's not sure where he's going yet. But I think Allah grant him a bright path. An admirer's authority came out of Stephen's office and wondered if behind these words are not hidden threats. Though they shouldn't. After all, the Mongol was not the kind of man to make veiled threats like that. He could be called Stephen's only friend. If the threats were real, he would have said so directly. Mason, hello, how are you? Stephen tried not to betray the excitement in his voice, but his son knew him too well. Hey, Dad, I went to the movies with the guys. What's up? No, nothing's wrong. I just called to see if you were okay. Okay, Dad, I've learned your habits. You probably got threatened again or something. Right? Stephen mentally agreed with his son. True, there had been a couple of times when he'd been threatened by people who were unhappy with the arbitration decision, and his, in particular, thieves in the law. But if you take everything to heart, you can immediately head in the noose and hang like Judas in the hay. No, he will never let him and his son be threatened. No, son, now you're wrong. By the way, you've decided on your future medical practice. Dad, I told you. We'll decide what we're gonna do in our 5th year. In the meantime, we'll be doing general training. Okay, son, then you'll see what the housekeeper has prepared. I hope you've already packed for college. When do you have to leave? In a week. What to pack? A couple of pants and t-shirts, underwear, and that's it. Don't worry, Dad. Okay, son, then I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up. And Stephen hung up. Yes, the son has grown up. He'll soon pack a bag and be well. And he'll be on his own. Although no, there is still work at home. A housekeeper who cooks and cleans. But that's not it. The man went to the window, opened it wide open, breathed in the warm summer air, and thought about it. Shouldn't I get married again? Hell, he's not that old. Maybe he should think about what he'd been told more than once. You can't bring Nadia back. His son had grown up, and he was all alone. It pressed on him a huge weight, like a stone that should be rolled up, but it keeps trying to roll down. Sisyphean labor, that's how it is with Stephen. All the rolling of the stone upwards. What's the use? For whom? And for what? The man sat down at a wide table of solid mahogany, splashed himself in a wide glass of 10-year-old cognac, and thought about it. If he decided to marry, how would Mason take it? And even if his son doesn't mind, is it worth changing his life so radically? Perhaps it should, but who should he consult? And my hand involuntarily reached for the phone and dialed the number of the old and wise Mongol. Jacob, good evening. No distractions. Greetings, Stephen. Oh no, of course not. We're having an evening tea party, and I'm glad to have your call. I've got a little business to attend to. The man hesitated and thought for a moment. Was it worth telling his question to a stranger? But if you think about it, an outsider's view might be more objective and correct. We should talk face to face. Mongol realized that this man wasn't going to call just like that, so it was worth listening to him and giving him advice. Yes, if you can, any time that's convenient for you. All right, Stephen, I heard you. Let's meet at 7 o'clock on the waterfront. There's a lovely restaurant there. We'll sit, we'll talk. Confidentiality guaranteed. Thank you. See you tonight, then. Already in the evening, men sat in a separate office and drank fragrant coffee. What's that? The aromatic beverage was made here with perfection. It was brewed by a real Arab, and not just on gas or in a coffee machine, but on hot sand, like the tribes did in the old days. And what did you want to talk to me about, Stephen? Jacob, if you don't mind, I'd love to be on a first-name basis. You and I have been through so much. It's about time we started talking on a first-name basis. So what's the question? You see, I was married a long time ago. My wife died. Oh yeah, I think you know all that. And now my son is going to medical school. And I caught myself thinking that I'll just stay in the household, and nobody needs an old man. Jacob perfectly understood his condition, so simply continued his glory. Yes, you're right. But that's not what's bothering me. I thought maybe I should get married. But Jacob, you won't believe me. I don't even have anyone to consult in this respect. I see your point. Of course, I won't look for a bride for you yet. Unless you ask, but I'll give you advice. You're not that old, so it's worth it. Thank you, Jacob. Well, as for a bride, I don't even know where to look for one. Jacob, with my acquaintances, connections, and wealth. Let's start with where you and your wife met. We've known each other since we were kids, so it's easy. Now, I guess young people today, they want money, cruises. What can I give them? Criminal meetings or lunch? And he waved his hand, showing that he simply does not know how to get acquainted with the opposite sex young girls. And to choose older ladies, I understand. And in this respect, I cannot help, only advice. You are not so old, can find yourself a beautiful woman and create a family in relation to your son. I think he won't mind. He's an adult, he'll get married soon. And you? Tulai nodded his head in gratitude and took a drink of flavored coffee. Just then his phone rang, and Jacob quickly got ready for the meeting, apologizing for such a short visit. Stephen, with all due respect to you, I apologize. I have to run to you. Stephen, with all due respect. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to run to you. You understand, things are going to get a little bit messy. Stephen nodded his head and, rising, held out his hand. The men shook hands and parted as good friends. Jacob left, and Stephen continued to sit at the table, his thoughts flying through his head like a whirlwind. Stephen raised his hand and gestured, called out to the waitress, "Girl, can I have 200 grams of the best cognac? And please, another cup of coffee." The waitress nodded and went to fulfill the order. Stephen sat at the table, drank cognac and coffee, looked out the window at the people passing by, and caught himself thinking that he did not want to go home. There is silence and emptiness of the big apartment, and Mason's son is already on his own. He has only company and girls on his mind. And the institute, it's his job to wait for his son on vacation. Ask him about his studies and student life. That's all. And what will you hear from him? Old man. I doubt it. You're not that old. The young girl's voice made Stephen flinch and almost spill coffee on his pants. I'm sorry if I startled you. I really didn't mean to. The girl defiantly turned around and sat down at a neighboring table. The waitress came over and put glasses of pure wine and fragrant coffee in front of her. Yes, apparently, the girl is not the first time here. Since the waitress knows what to serve and how Stephen stared at the girl and almost fell off the chair. No wonder she was almost an exact replica of his first wife, Nancy. The now deceased Stephen could not believe his eyes. After all, this was his first and only love, whom he had lost many years before. And now he had found, excuse me, something wrong. The girl looked at the man who was staring at her intently. No, I'm sorry. It's just that you look so much like my wife. I hope she's not in that cafe right now. I'm sorry, but I don't think she'd like you looking at me like that. Oh no, she's not here, and she's certainly not gonna make a scene. But you're an exact replica of her. If I didn't know my Nancy, I'd think you were her daughter. Her name is Nancy. That's a beautiful name. But really, my name is Molly. That's a beautiful name too. Molly, can I invite you to have coffee with me? But we're having coffee. But we're at opposite tables. Although, if you'd like, you can sit at mine. I'd love to keep you company. Thank you for inviting me. She's a nice girl. Would you like to order something? My name is Stephen, by the way. No, thank you, Stephen. I'm having a coffee and a glass of white and clear wine. And so it began. Their amazing and fascinating communication, which gradually flowed into a closer and more trusting relationship. But that's what Stephen thought. Although at a deep level he realized that such a beauty needs his money rather than himself. And in fact, Molly Williams needed his money, his entire empire and influence. Molly came into Stephen's life, not by accident. The girl observed the life and activities of the diplomat Stephen Bracker, his son Mason, and in the beginning thought about marrying him. Molly, why do you want a son? Womanize his father, and take all the money to work, painfully told Molly friend Camille. The very idea of seducing Stephen was hers. What is there to say, Molly, and beautiful, and not stupid with a figure. She loves money, and not shy to share it with her only friend. All right, what about Mason? He's the primary heir. You realize if Stephen goes down, all the money goes to Sonny. I realize that. Then she'll just poison him first. What's the big deal? I'll help you. I'm a chemist by training for a reason. Or am I? Camille's plan was brilliantly simple and ingenious at the same time. Molly loved money and the good life, so it wasn't hard to convince her of her own idea. And if her friend kills either father or son, she will always have ironclad evidence against her. You won't pay your friends forever, but you won't want to. I'll tell the father or the son, and you'll go to jail. And I'll get recognition, honor, and respect. Molly understood that too. Although the desire to live a beautiful life, bathe in luxury, go to Bali and Paris prevailed. And what can I say? She thought naively, girl, if you do everything wisely, you can get rid of Camille in time. Molly agreed to her friend's plan. From that day on, the two conspired. All began to follow Stephen and Mason. And if with the first was more difficult, then Mason Molly laughed quickly. It came out corny and unexpected, as a friend would say. And I improvised on the spot. One spring day, things just didn't go according to plan. And Molly nose to nose ran into each other at the store. A conversation ensued with Mason. Young people liked each other and began to meet. From that moment, in the hands of the girl, streams of information about the influential father. And although the guy did not tell who his father was, but willingly shared information about his habits, where he dines, and where he likes to walk, which was more than enough for her friends. It was the information that Molly received that gave her the idea to get acquainted, purely by chance, so to speak, with Stephen at a cafe on the waterfront. And the simple plan paid off. Stephen fell in love with Molly, who didn't expect her looks to play into her hands at all. When she heard she looked like her first wife, Molly was overjoyed. Then it was possible to act quite actively. After all, she had such a trump card in her hands. Mentally, Molly lost her hands, but inwardly she was frightened. The thought of having to poison at least one or even two people. Camille, I agree with you, of course, but I'm scared. Aren't you scared of dating a father and son at the same time? You realize that at the very least, one of them will leave you. At the most, You'll lose all rights to the plan. And then what? But if we get caught? Why would we get caught? I'm poisoning Mason. But after you marry yourself, and then it's on to him. How's that for a plan? Don't worry about my work. I'm an excellent chemist. I'll make sure no one finds out. Molly shook her lips and had nothing to say to her friend's argument. She knew that Camille was a first-class chemist. She had taken all the Olympics at school in chemistry with a gold medal. She was valued at work for being able to determine the composition of a compound almost by eye. And now that she was helping her, there was no reason to doubt that the work would be perfect. Okay, Camille, what's the plan? Dump Mason and put all your attention and your beauty into Stephen. If it comes down to marriage, after you're signed, I'll slip him some poison. And that's it. You are wife and Harris. And while you're enjoying your honeymoon, I'll think of a new way to poison your aged spouse. The plan seemed simple and easy enough at the same time, and that alarmed Molly, though it gave her a chance to execute it. She thought and slowly nodded her head. Well then, let's start on Sunday and get started. Stephen likes to have coffee at lunchtime at Terry's Cafe on the waterfront. That's where I'll finish it. Help wanted at home Inner exulted that the friend had fallen for, in fact, her ingenious plan to seize Stephen's money and real estate. But the girls did not know what plan Mother Fate was preparing for them, although everything began successfully enough. Molly, as if unintentionally met Stephen, began a relationship. Mason himself quite easily and simply carried the parting of the next axis. I did not interfere with the girl in the realization of her plan. But after 6 months of meeting, spent together days and nights, Stephen decided to make Molly a proposal. The man fought long and hard about how to talk to Mason about it, but he couldn't figure it out. Molly, how do I tell my son I'm getting married? The question didn't take the girl by surprise. One beautiful winter morning, I invited him over for winter vacation and say, what's the big deal? Although he always seems to come himself, it'll be a surprise for him. Although the girl tried to make a casual appearance, but inwardly worried about how her appearance in her father's house would be perceived. Mason himself, they had known each other before, and now it turns out that she broke up with him for his father. Okay, the girl thought, we'll figure it out as we go along. And she wasn't wrong. Before New Year's Eve, Mason came on winter vacation to his father's house, where he met Molly. From surprise, the guy even stopped on the threshold of his father's house and dropped the bag from his hands. But on his father's question about what happened, did not answer anything. Molly, hi. I understand you left me for my father and his 1 million. Asked the guy to the girl when he came out of his room into the kitchen late at night. Well, how can I put it, Mason? Realize that you're his son. I found out not too long ago when I saw your picture on the mantle. But at the time we broke up, I chose him because he's mature, romantic, wealthy. I'm sorry, Mason, you're probably right. We're all trying to build our own happiness. Molly, but you do realize that my father is not young. And if anything were to happen to him, I have the entire estate. You might get some of it, but it would be a fraction of his estate. I understand. But that's not the most important thing in our relationship. I'm a first-rate translator myself, so I can earn a caviar sandwich. And I think my father will leave me something too. It may not be much, but it's enough to get me started. That's fair, at least. Mason nodded understandingly and simply took a bottle of water from the refrigerator and left. What could you do? My father had always been surrounded by such money-hungry hotties, but once in Kosovo, he'd get them in a heartbeat. And here. And then suddenly, he decided to get married. Did Dad fail his famous intuition? It shouldn't. If it did, maybe he should give her a chance. But he didn't get that chance. The relationship between Molly and Mason as such exhausted itself, and the girl focused all her attention and energy on Stephen. Although it was not easy. Constant meetings and solving diplomatic issues on a business trip. Molly guessed what questions often solves her potential husband, and she was worried. After all, She realized that one stray bullet could derail her plans. But Stephen was as good as his word. Neither bullet nor stray blade could take him. He deftly sidestepped every trap, like a musketeer fighting off the cardinal's men with his sword. Yes, Camille, you can't imagine that he's immune to knives, bullets, nothing. We were walking the other day from the theater. I called him to the embankment, and specifically to a dark corner, but there behind the old summer theater. You know, the favorite place of the inadequate. So what? And that the interest to their family life grew not by days, but by hours exactly nothing. Molly thoughtfully stretched out and poured herself and her friend a martini. Yes, friend, you know how to live beautifully. I guess your Stephen spoils you. Yes, he does. And just imagine, he enrolled me in etiquette classes, then ballroom dancing. He says it's for my future coming out. That's what he calls his diplomatic community. I don't seem to know how to make conversation, but the way I got him. And he still got me. Oh well, that's good. Let him learn. It'll be good for me. What's he getting you for New Year's? Probably that diamond necklace I showed him in the last issue of Vogue. I don't know though. Molly shrugged languidly and took a sip of the flavored drink, carelessly flipped back a curl and flicked it back. Yeah, she had gotten lucky with Stephen, and everything was basically thanks to Camille. She was the one who'd hooked her up in such a sensitive matter. And if it all works out, Camille, I couldn't have done all this without you. So, girlfriend, if it works out, I'll make you my manager. Or, like the top person in whatever field you're in. That'd be nice. But I'll tell you, we're worth a lot to each other, and I couldn't do it on my own. And you wouldn't have gotten to this point without my help. And the end of this whole thing is pretty much on my shoulders. So remember, girlfriend, there's more where that came from. That's true. But let's not talk about the bad stuff. I got you a present, by the way. It's from the money Stephen's giving me. And Molly took a puffy bag out of her purse and handed it to Camille. She opened it eagerly and looked at her friend in surprise. Yes, there is money and a trip for 10 days to Bali. I know that you wanted to visit Bali for a long time, so I'm waiting for you in the new year, rested and full of strength for future achievements. And they hugged. Yes, the girls had no idea that their perfect plan would have the most unexpected result. But that would come later. In the meantime, each of the participants in this play enjoyed the New Year's Eve festivities and the expectation of a miracle. A month later, Molly and Stephen were riding in a car to the airport and holding each other's hands. On the fingers of the newlyweds sparkled personalized wedding rings made to order. And at that moment, the girl was the happiest. Stephen, you don't know how happy I am. I do. Happiness is mine. Your eyes are sparkling like these two diamonds. He nodded his head and looked out the window of the car park. Everything flashed before his eyes. But the man's thoughts were far away, all in business and worries. He didn't even notice how predatorily Molly looked at him, who every day wanted to kill him more and more with every minute, with every moment he lived. She hated her lawful husband for his attitude toward everything. The way he ate, slept, spent money not always on her whims. What was there to do? Molly asked herself, only to wait until Camille arrives, until the opportunity arises and Mason stops by in his Porsche on spring break to her father's house, when she can pour poison on his plate. Too much, when Molly thought to herself, clenching her fists to a crunch, but realized that she had no right to give herself away by word, gesture, or deed just yet, to wait, to be patient, and grit her teeth as Camille had taught her. If her friend had her looks, she could do a lot of things. Molly, what do you want for New Year's Eve? I remember you showed me a necklace from a magazine, but you know, it's out of stock. It's not that it's out of stock. It's just that you have to pre-order it. It'll take a long time, and I'm afraid you won't have a present for New Year's Eve. No, there will be a gift, but you'll have to discuss it with me. Just please don't interrupt. Molly put her hand on his palm and gently squeezed her husband's fingers. Let's agree as follows. You place an order for this necklace, and on New Year's Eve, You just give me a bouquet of roses, and that's it. Are you sure? Stephen looked at his wife uncomprehendingly. He didn't expect that. In fact, he had never had a girl like Molly. Any other girl would have thrown a tantrum. Like, give me presents, like 3 times as much, and here it's just like this. But okay, if he wants to wait, let him wait, and he'll revise the gift as he sees fit. Yes, darling, I'm a sensible and prudent girl, so I don't want to spend my husband's money for nothing. As well as to spend his future inheritance, Molly thought to herself, but didn't let it show. She really didn't want her husband to spend a lot of money on anything. Though a diamond necklace is not a damn thing, but a very profitable investment, which can always be sold as needed. So I'll wait. Stephen looked askance at his wife and smiled. Look at her. She didn't demand anything. That's why he appreciated the gesture. Already near the house, the husband gave his wife his hand and helped her to get out of the car, closed the door, and put the car on the alarm. The evening passed quietly and peacefully. Probably too quiet and peaceful, Molly said to herself under her breath. Take it from under the blanket. Husband Ivan locked himself in the office again and solves his own archly important issues. Nothing, soon all this will be over. In the meantime, it is worth enjoying a quiet and peaceful life. After all, if everything planned will come true. That night Molly had nightmares. Camille and Stephen, who for some reason were asking for help, were trying to catch her by the arms. Molly, wake up. Molly cried out and sat up on the bed, feeling cold sweat running down her back. Scary dream. Stephen, I'm scared. I beg you, don't leave me. I lost you in a dream. And it wasn't even there. They called me and asked me for help. Don't worry, my girl, I won't leave you. I'll even get you from the other side. He wanted to say he'd protect her even from the dead. But it came out like this. Freudian slip. A lot of people would say that. But as it turned out, the man's words were prophetic. A week and a half later, just before Christmas, the family gathered around the big table. Molly and Stephen, Mason and Camille, who had become almost like family in this house. Mommy, here's a present for you. And Stephen held out to the girl a small printed box. Oh, what's in it? And the girl began to quickly tear open the beautiful wrapping. And when she opened it, there was no limit to her surprise. Stephen, it's a gorgeous gold set. Yes, I'm sorry, of course. It's not the one I ordered for my wife. But oh, you don't have to worry. I'm so glad. I've never gotten a gift like this before, and I don't think anyone ever will. But I also have a gift for you and your son. It may not be as lavish, but it's made with no small amount of respect and a piece of my heart. And Camille took out from a large bag 2 packages, holding out to Mason and Stephen. So this is interesting. What's the big deal about these packages? Mason began to apply the soft wrapping with interest and was simply lost in guessing what could be there. The guy realized that with a salary to give something expensive and exclusive she cannot, but also frank, fake, or obscene will not offer. But when he opened it, to say that he was surprised is to say nothing. White-colored scarf, tied from the finest and fluffiest thread. It was long enough to wrap around his neck several times. Wow, Camille. Did you knit it yourself? Here you go, Mason. It's white. And Stephen is light gray. And believe me, the threads are pure English wool and of the finest quality. I hope they keep you warm just a little bit. And even if you don't wear them, they'll keep my memory alive for a long time. About Mason. I don't know if he'll wear your gift to Camille, but I'll certainly wear it. And to prove his point, the man wrapped a scarf around his neck and held his head up proudly. He made a gentlemanly bow toward Camille and gave her a gorgeous smile. Camille, I can't guarantee that I'll always wear it, but today I will wear it for a couple of hours as a sign of respect and atonement for the missing gift. And the guy also wrapped the scarf around his neck. At the end of the back, everyone raised their glasses and clinked their glasses and drank a sip of sparkling wine. Only Camille grinned gloatingly and rejoiced that her plan had succeeded. She had long thought of how to poison father and son, but only in Bali locals pointed her to one poisonous plant, which categorically could not be touched with bare hands. It was this unpretentious and unsightly plant that emitted a strong poison and could cause asphyxiation if it came into contact with the skin, even if it was only for a short time. It was this information that pushed the girl to solve her long-dormant question about poisoning father and son. And what was there to think she'd done? So read anything and presented it as a gift. Problem solved. And the occasion was a great Christmas, and the gift itself would have looked appropriate enough. It certainly wouldn't arouse suspicion. And it worked. Camille didn't tell her friend the details of her plan. After all, everything had been agreed upon in advance, and she had just had the opportunity. If it works, I'll let you know later. No, but then we'll look for another option. The advantage of this method of killing was that few of her colleagues could detect this type of poison in contact with air and skin. He acted quickly, decomposing in the air quickly, and acted like an unknown politician. Within half an hour, 2 ambulances and a morgue car were outside the house. Molly, are you sure your husband Stephen and his son Mason are not on any medication? They haven't eaten or drunk anything new this day. The policeman's question sounded strange, but the girl realized that it was standard interrogation procedure. Yes, I'm sure we ordered food from a restaurant where everyone knows us. We go there quite often for drinks. Here, open the husband's bar. Bottle was taken from there, all the alcohol. Husband buys it himself. I don't understand what happened. We were sitting in. You please calm down and tell us what happened. Any detail is important to us. After all, you realize that your husband and his son are quite famous people, and the situation itself must be understood. Nothing supernatural happened. We ordered a dish at the restaurant in the morning, and by 7 o'clock it was hot. Then my friend Mason and Stephen got together. Then they both started choking. Although we all ate from the same table, drank champagne from the same bottle. Although no, Mason and Stephen raised their first glass with champagne. And then they poured their own cognac. There's a bottle over there, but it's an expensive drink. Molly sobbed to her heart's content. She didn't understand how it could happen that her husband and stepson started choking out of the blue. And then they just went into convulsions. The girl watched them convulsing on the floor and could do nothing, being in a stupor. Only Camille quickly dialed the number of the ambulance and called the team, and then the police ambulance. Mason was taken to the morgue and her husband was taken to intensive care. Now she and the perpetrator are being interrogated in separate rooms. Molly, I believe you. I don't even doubt your word. But the investigator got up and began to walk back and forth on the expensive Persian carpet, not knowing where to begin. The old king knew who Bracker was and realized that there were many people who wanted him dead. And this Barbie was just another one of his hobbies, albeit as his lawful wedded wife. All right, here you go. Molly, drink some water and calm down. I understand your condition, and I believe you don't know anything because you don't know anything, because you can pin the murder of my husband and his son on me. Oh no, really? That's out of the question. I'm well aware that you and your friend have nothing to do with this. So here's my card. The investigator took out a business card and put it on the coffee table. If you remember anything, please call me at any time of the day, and I will also keep you in the loop. He gently stroked her shoulder and left the room. There was nothing for him to do. After all, it was already clear that Molly did not benefit from the death of her husband, nor did she benefit from the death of her son. And if there was a benefit, then get to the bottom of it. Igor, what's our investigator? Walked into the office and looked at his partner. Noah, nothing. Just questioned Camille, the wife's friend. Yes, I realize it's nothing. Camille, good evening. Actually, not so good evening. I'm Senior Investigator Kotov. I understand you can't say anything about the essence of the questions asked. And the investigator looked at the short interrogation report. Yes, you understand, Mr. Investigator. We ate and drank from the same table. Everything was fine. And then the men started choking. I don't know why, but I called an ambulance immediately. I thought they were both epileptic. No, it was poisoning. And I found out who poisoned them. It gave her an electric shock, but she tried to pull herself together. But Molly and I ate and drank what the men ate and drank. And if we wanted to poison them, there'd be 4 dead bodies, not 2. Camille, you better calm your friend down. I see you're a girl of stronger character. We'll be on our way. There's nothing more for us to do for now. Try to calm down and get some sleep. I'll call you tomorrow. Camille nodded her head and did not say anything further, afraid to give herself away by a word or a question, even by a simple movement, a hand or a facial expression. Half an hour later, the house that had previously been full of life and laughter was empty. Yes, mother. Here she remained practically the sole and full mistress in the house. Camille was inwardly jubilant that she could so easily and simply put her simple genius plan into action. So it's you, Camille. You, Molly, couldn't say a word. Her friend did it all on her own and behind her back without even telling her. What if it had been her husband or stepson? What did you think? It was our plan. And it all worked out just like we wanted it to. Nobody even noticed. And you played it so natural. And Camille hugged her friend and patted her on the back. But Molly, not knowing why, pushed her away and ran to her bedroom, flooding her with tears. But also a fool. Run, run. You'll thank me 100 times later. If not, I'll report everything to the investigator. I'll say I ordered her husband's murder. Camille carefully took the investigator's card and tried to memorize the number. She did not touch her friend. She realized that she was still hysterical and could not react adequately to her words. Let you cry. She'll get drunk. We'll talk tomorrow. I should eat and drink myself. It's Christmas. When else can I sit at a table like this? Molly, don't be silly. Come out here and talk to me. But all Tommy got in response was silence, coffin-like and ringing at the same time. It made her uncomfortable. And it seems the girl threw a warm blanket over her shoulders, turned on the electric fireplace, poured herself brandy in a puffed glass, and sat down in the once legal chair of the already former master of the house believed that Stephen would not survive the poisoned scarf. Mason died instantly, and this one's still breathing. He's hanging on for dear life. I wonder how long he'll last. A long time. Molly's voice sounded so suddenly that Camille's hand trembled, and the expensive brandy spilled out onto the open fire and sparks flew into the room. Molly, I see you've come to your senses already. That's good. Have a drink with me in honor of Christmas, Camille. Do you really think it's a good time for a drink? And you're not embarrassed by the fact that it's only been a couple hours since you... Yes, I poisoned your husband and stepson, that's all. Notice, my dear, on your tip. And so let's not argue. You wanted it. And you got it. What's wrong? It's not the way you wanted. But I'm sorry. Whatever you had the brains and the money for. Molly stood in front of her friend in the doorway and clenched her hands into fists. She herself, not realizing why she was so angry. After all, there really was a pact between them. It was done. And that Stephen is still alive. But that's a matter of life or death. Camille, I'm sorry. I guess it pisses me off that you didn't tell me this was gonna happen today. That's what's freaking me out. Molly was also not a knave fool and understood perfectly well that Camille had got some solid dirt against her, and in case of something, she would easily give it to the police. Or look and will press all her life with dirt. But we'll see about that. Sweetie, don't fall into your own trap. Well, we have to make peace for now, and then we'll see. There are more important issues. All right, come on, poor. We have to turn everything in, you see. That investigator is going to fight tomorrow. What are we going to tell him? What we said today. Not a word more, not a word less. I hope my friend won't let us down. Or remind you why we did all this together. I emphasize, together. All right, let's have another drink. I need to get drunk tonight. Molly poured himself a glass of whiskey. and took 3 big gulps of scalding. The liquid flowed down her throat in a hot wave. No taste and flavor, as they show in the movies. Only the hot stream burns the temples, and all Camille looked at her friend attentively, and she became afraid not because she was drinking, but because in such a drunken frenzy she might say something unnecessary. By the way, where did you go with those scarves? Molly just now remembered the weapons, the murders. Don't worry about it. They're hanging on the chairs over there. Molly just wanted to reach up and throw them in the fireplace. Somehow she immediately slapped her arm. Are you out of your mind? Leaving evidence like that against us? Don't you dare touch that. Or do you want to follow Mason to the afterlife or the emergency room? I'd like a table next to you. There's still poison on them, but it'll wear off soon enough. There'll be nothing left of him like a magic pumpkin by midnight. Let him lie on the chairs over there for now. You're sure? I could hear a note of distrust and doubt in my friend's voice. Are you? Or do you know better than me the chemistry and all the plant poisons? I don't think so. Oh, baby. Just take my word for it. And Camille took a sip of the expensive drink with a businesslike look. She did know that poison was unstable in the air, and soon there would be no trace of it on her clothes. That was why she wore the prescription just before leaving her house and poured the residue into the toilet. But what confused her was that it didn't work on Stephen the way she wanted it to. Maybe the do's and don'ts. Mason, you went straight to the creator. But this one, look, he made it. They took him to the emergency room. God forbid he makes it. Molly saw that her friend was thinking about something for a reason. Yeah, you know, Molly, here's the thing. Don't tell me it didn't go according to plan. That's right. Mason, your stepson went straight to God. Stephen, apparently, was a little tougher. He ended up in the emergency room. You're telling me he's gonna make it? I don't think so. It'll take time for the doctors to find an antidote to whatever got into his system. And even if he doesn't die, you're gonna have to decide on the spot, aren't you? Camille, and how do you envision that? Tell me something. You go to the hospital first thing tomorrow to check on your husband, like a decent and loving wife, and watch on the spot. And then you tell me, well. Molly took a sip of brandy and nodded her head. Emotions somewhat moved to the background, giving way to logic. Molly realized that since they had started this case, they had reached the halfway point. It was worth finishing it finally. And maybe it was a good thing that Camille hadn't said anything to her, but had organized and conducted the whole thing herself. Then she would not be suspected. If possible, it would be worth it to dump it on the other person and kill 2 birds with 1 stone to get rid of the potential heirs and her compromised friend. Okay, will you come with me? Molly really didn't want to go to the hospital alone. I think I should come with you. At least I'll find out from the doctors what they know and what they've done. And then it's home on the brain. What to do with all the information we have. Then let's do it at home. I'm going to bed. Do you know where your room is? Camille nodded her head and didn't bother to answer her friend even the trivial thing, did she? Why would she want to be quiet right now? Just to enjoy the sight of the fire and the sounds. The snippets of howling logs in the fireplace. The taste of expensive cognac that she certainly couldn't afford. Lucky friend, Camille thought, listening to Molly's footsteps and mentally imagining herself in her place. But I'm sorry, Camille shadows Molly, and you certainly can't have all this wealth. Still, I can get half of it from an already rich heiress, so to speak, for my silence and complicity. The next morning, the girlfriends called a cab and drove to the hospital, where they took Stephen to the emergency room, where they took Mason's body. Molly didn't even know, and they didn't even bother with the question. Why would she need it? If anything, there is a manager, their friends and doctors. Let them deal with it. But it worried her. After all, she had never worked with poison brought back from vacation before, so she wasn't quite sure if the doctors would find its residue in Mason and Stephen's bodies or not. But thank God, it was all right for her. Molly, good afternoon. You know, we have wonderful news. We were able to stabilize your husband's condition. So we can say that that's a success in the situation we're in right now. What about my husband? He fell out of his chair yesterday, choking, just like Mason. I don't understand what could have happened. It was probably me. But so far, we can't figure out what the compound is or what antidote to use. Our doctors have tested the tissues and blood of your stepson Mason, but have been unable to establish anything, as well as in the tests of your spouse. The doctor threw up his hands. I'm sorry. Started fawning over Molly, who had been doing all this time, looking grieving and half-trapped. Doctor, what can I do? Molly looked at the doctor carefully and shook his hand sympathetically. There's nothing. There's nothing even we can do. Your stepson's body will be taken by Stephen's management company, and he'll take care of the funeral. And you can pray for your husband's speedy recovery. Molly nodded her head, and leaning her head on the side, the doctor said quietly, "Here is my phone number." And she handed him her card. "If anything, call, and I will periodically visit my beloved husband." The girl turned around and slowly walked to the exit. She also stood near Stephen's room, looked at him, and quietly turned around and went to the exit. She had heard and seen enough, and that pleased her. So the doctors had found nothing and could do nothing. Just as the local shaman had told her, Camillus was walking down the corridor, and a vicious smile played on her face, predatory lionesses, and everyone who saw her simply looked away. There's not much of a psyche going on. Already in the car, Molly looked carefully at her friend and quietly asked Camille, "What do you think?" "Nothing, it's fine. And they didn't recognize me." "That's good. It means they can't find an antidote. But I don't like the fact that Stephen's in a coma. Means the poison didn't fully affect him. Or the dose was low. Do you have any more of that poison?" "No. Everything I brought back from Bali has already been used on your husband and stepson's scarf. Now we can only hope he doesn't come out of his coma. But he may not. A day, a year, a decade. He could. And imagine, people can be in comas for 20 years, but I can't wait that long. Don't do anything yet. Wait, and then this. And then you bribe the doctor to take him off the ventilator, and that's it. What's there to think about? Or should I teach you how to be and what to do? And Molly, it's okay that I practically did everything myself. It's okay that it's my husband who you ordered for me. Because Molly, we're real gangster partners now, and believe me, we're in this together. And if anything, we're going down together." Molly was shaken by her friend's words, but she realized how right she was. But what if Camille suddenly told the investigator everything? Although on the other hand, her words against Molly meant nothing. The agreement was verbal. And those scarves were a gift from Camille. So she could just relax and move on with her life. But Molly's beautiful and well-fed life, as well as her meager gifts, handouts from time to time of small sums of money, annoyed her. To Tom, she simply didn't know how to get more. And what could she rip off? None of them she was related to as mistress or wife could claim property like the late Mason. "Because, shouldn't I tell Stephen all about it to myself?" said Camille, sitting in the study of the former owner of the luxurious mansion. She stood up and walked across the 6th carpet, inviting her footsteps. Yes, mahogany, antique editions, books, paintings are all good. But Stephen's in a coma. There's nothing he can do, so that's the point of this plan. And what's she gonna say? "Sorry, man, I read my gift with plant poison. And you never died. But it's your wife's fault." Yeah, sounds stupid. But then again, no, it's not. Just going and telling him to a guy in a coma. Camille went to the window and looked out at the rose beds. Beautiful, of course. Maybe we should go to the hospital tomorrow, while Molly's asleep, and tell Stephen the truth. She'd once read in some scientific journal that even in a coma, a person could hear everything that was going on around them. Maybe that's how he comes back to life faster, or squint faster. Still, he can't see who's telling him all this stuff. And there. But Camille had no idea how close to the truth she was. The poison really hadn't taken its full effect on Stephen. Because of all that was happening around, all the words and actions of the doctors, the man heard and understood. He understood that at one moment Camille sat down on his bed and stroked his arm. "Hello, Stephen. I hope you remember me. I'm Camille, a friend of your wife's. You remember I gave you and Mason 2 hand-knotted scarves." So she got out of bed and went to the window. She turned around and looked out. She wanted to say everything, but how could she? "You see, Stephen, it's all right for me to be so familiar with you. Your wife who Molly poisoned you. Do you remember those 2 knitted scarves I gave you? Well, they were impregnated with plant poison. So your son died, and you're lying here in a coma, unable to say, do, or move a finger." The man heard Camille's sorrowful confession, and he wanted not only to cry, but to scream with all his lungs, which were now replaced by the artificial respiration machine. He lay there and could do nothing. And Camille was right. Not to say, not to do, not to lift a finger. But the higher powers will help me, Stephen thought. I've gotten out of worse than this. Stephen, just listen to me. Molly wants your money and your property. That's why she killed your son. She wanted to kill you, but I guess the poison didn't work right. And now you're left to fend for yourself. If you're trying, I think you can figure it out for yourself. I don't know how, but it's your internal family dispute. The girl stood up and walked out. Camille walked down the hospital corridor and didn't know why she had come here in the first place. Why she told everything like this, only at the same time accusing his own wife of all wrongdoings. But the deed was done. And then, as it happened, the phone rang in her pocket. Molly popped up on the screen. "Yeah, Molly, hi. What's up? Where are you?" Her voice sounded worried and concerned. "I thought I'd go shopping this morning." "Why?" "Yeah, I woke up in my house." "No. When are you coming?" "Maybe I'll drive into town. Have lunch at that little restaurant." Molly paused for a second and thought, why not? It's enough to end Stephen once and for all. Getting his wife to kill him. I'm all for it. Go ahead, drive. I'll be there in an hour. Molly hung up the phone and thought for a moment. She would have enough time not only to make a reservation at the restaurant, but also to come up with another ingenious plan to finish Stephen off. And she already knew how to do it all on her own. If Stephen could simply be disconnected from the ventilator and done by the doctor's hands, and let Molly pay for it. Yeah, girlfriend, now you're really screwed on both your money and your spouse, and your estate. Well, I'll be damned if you're gonna get it too. Smiling to herself, she proudly threw off her head and walked down the corridor. She wanted to sing at her own brilliance and at the fact that so much in this life was going according to her plan. And at this minute, Stephen lay crying inwardly. He had heard all that his wife's friend had said and could not believe what he had heard. Could Molly have done this to him? The one he loved and idolized so much. Did everything she wanted. Bought her the best. Even his first wife, he never pampered like this. And this. Doctor, do you have to help me? Molly almost ran to the doctor who was examining her husband. Good afternoon, Mrs. Bracker. What's wrong? What can I do for you? I need to talk to you one-on-one. You realize I can do it in your office. All right, if you insist, come on in. The only thing is, Molly, I'd like you to wait for me for half an hour. I have to make my rounds. You know, we've got some heavy patients here. And then I'm all yours. And having escorted the visitor into the office, the doctor continued his usual daily rounds. About 40 minutes later, the doctor was sitting in his office. Across from him sat Molly, almost sobbing. Mrs. Bracker, please don't cry. I can't watch such a beautiful girl cry. Just call me Molly. You understand, doctor. It's been a week since I buried Mason and almost 9 days since the tragedy. But every night, my stepson comes to me and holds his hands out to me. Can you imagine that? The doctor knew the girl was under a lot of stress. But in that case, you'd have to involve a psychiatrist and a psychologist. His paraphysics are a little different. Molly, I understand you're worried about your husband, but there's nothing I can do. The human brain is a mystery. How long will he be in a coma? Even I can't say. The doctor threw up his hands, showing his helplessness. But at that moment, Molly opened her purse and took out a few wads of dollars and tied them with bank tape, unplugging it from the machine. Let him die is all that's required of you, and you'll get 5 times as much. Believe me, it's a lot of money, but you won't regret what you get afterward. And the doctor believed because he understood how great the reward was. Even what's on the table, it would be enough for him to live a year without poverty and a life with his family. What else is there to get? Molly, are you sure you know what you're saying? This is your husband, isn't it? I know he is. And I also know that it's in your power and my will to make sure that he passes away, so to speak, reunited with Mason on the other side of the world. Molly, but you're not dealing with an ordinary man. This is Bracker. They say the devil himself protects and guides him. I don't believe in God or the devil, so I just have to take legal rights as a widowed heiress, that's all. But the doctor's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. And immediately, without waiting for an answer, a nurse entered the room. She had no face on her, and apparently she could justify her behavior. Igor Vasilievich, our patient is awake. Bracker has regained consciousness. It's a real miracle. Igor Vasilievich barely had time to cover the money with a magazine and immediately cast a glance at Molly. There was no face on Bracker's wife, and it wasn't that surprising. After all, it's one thing to order her husband's murder and another thing when he came to his senses. Molly thought the same thing, for from that moment on, her plans were ruined. But what followed was something no one expected. Quickly into the room. Molly, are you with me? Yes, of course I am. I mean, it really is such a miracle. My husband practically came back from the dead. The doctor and the nurse were walking fast enough, and Molly was practically on her feet. And how could she not be worried? You never know what's going to happen next. But then it did. Doctor, good afternoon. Stephen looked at the doctor and the nurse, and his gaze fell real in the corridor, and watched from behind the glass at him. Molly, probably call the police, and have my wife come in here. I have a statement to make. Stephen, are you sure you need the police right now? Yes, in principle. You as a doctor and here is a nurse as a witness. You can record my words, or rather, statement, pleas in my death, or rather, a failed attempt to kill me and the murder of my son. Blame my wife Molly and her friend Tom. I don't remember her last name. Do you know Molly's last name? The nurse gave the doctor a quick glance, and when he nodded, she left the room. She gestured down the hall to Molly's room, and without waiting, she rushed to the post to answer the phone. Nurse Victoria had not expected such a turn of events in this tangled story. Although on the one hand, the wife's attempt to become a widow is a classic of the genre. While she called the police in the ward in full swing, there was a conversation, or rather, how to say, a silent battle between Stephen and Molly, witnessed by the doctor. Molly, is there anything you want to tell me? The look in her husband's fallen gray eyes trilling into her eye sockets. No, but only that I'm glad you're awake like this, and it's a credit to Father. Stephen, I went to the temple, but the one near us, and I ordered a service for my repose. Stephen said it so loudly that Molly and the doctor jumped on the spot. Stephen, don't talk nonsense. Please, I didn't ask for any repose, just for your health. And don't look at me like that. Molly, how should I look at you? I've been told by a higher power that my murder is yours. That's not the point, and don't even think about arguing. Stephen, how do you figure that? Well, I hope you haven't gotten rid of those 2 scarves Tom gave you for Christmas. And then Molly had the thought that Camille had told him everything. But how could she? That bitch. She knew she'd take it. Yes, she'd tell her husband. But even if she did, how could he hear? After all, according to the doctors, he was in a coma the whole time. These thoughts rushed rapidly through the girl's mind, but Molly was not as experienced as her husband, and all this was reflected on her face. So I'm right. Stephen's voice was no longer so loud. But even in the silence of the room, It sounded like a judgment. Don't even think about running away. The police have already been called. So what? And then 3 investigators in civilian clothes and 2 uniformed policemen entered the room. Among them was Noah, also familiar to Molly, an investigator who looked at the woman carefully and without saying a word. He took the handcuffs out of his pocket and twirled them in front of her nose. Well, Mrs. Bracker, shall we confess? She was no longer Mrs. Bracker, but just Molly Williams, who had so cleverly managed to get under my side. But I had underestimated her stupidity, greed, as well as Tony's cunning. Good thing it all came out in such an unexpected way. Stephen tried to raise himself on his elbows, but his strength was not yet sufficient, and he returned to his former position with a heavy sigh. The doctor wanted to help, but the man raised his hand and stopped him. "Not worth it, doctor, Mr. Investigator. I take it." And he looked at the men in civilian clothes. "Yes, that's right. I'm in charge of your case, no. Remember the old Soviet movie? Yeah, same rank. Captain Stephen, I'm glad you've come back to life. But you're weak. Maybe we shouldn't say anything yet. Testify. Any court might question it later. They certainly won't. You take my word for it. You will first detain my ex-wife and escort her to a separate room. And I'll tell you everything in detail." The investigator looked at his colleagues, who stood in bewilderment and looked warily at each other. And what to say? After all, everyone realized that he was dealing with the omnipotent Gakjim, who was not only in the government offices, but also had connections in the world of reputable thieves and criminal lawmen. But the investigator realized that without Stephen's testimony, he was out of a job. "This is a highly sensitive case." He nodded, and 2 surgeons instantly took Molly under their arms and led her out into the corridor. The doctor followed them, showing them where they could take Bracker's ex-wife. "So, colleagues, send someone to the house of this Tony's friend. I understand she's involved in this case too." "Yeah, you're right. I think you have her address. I mean, you were definitely at our house and took a statement." The investigator nodded his head and looked at his colleague. Professionals understood each other without words, and while the detention was being prepared, Tony Stephen lay on the bed with closed eyes and gathered his thoughts. The very decision to hand his wife over to the police had not been easy for him, but he realized that he could not go on like this. If they stayed together, Molly and Tanya would come up with another clever revenge plan. And then his wife's friend wouldn't be so stupid as to tell him everything. "Noah, my wife's friend Camille told me all about my poisoning when I was in a coma. But don't think I'm not stupid or crazy. I was unconscious, but I heard everything. And there's a security camera in every ITU room. You can see when Camille came to see me. Plus, you can hear everything she told me from her. Just by having a lip reader, if she's on camera, it's easy for him to read everything she told me. She thought I couldn't hear anything. That's why I was so candid. There are cameras." The investigator looked at the doctor, who had returned to the room. "Yes, there are, and the tapes are kept. So it shouldn't be too hard to get a video of your wife's friends. Excuse me, ex-wife's visit. In terms of cameras, we have quality cameras with wide angle and German optics. So I think it will be possible to lip-read what was said." "That's good, so I won't recount everything now. I don't have the energy, but I'll summarize it briefly. Have your Argali go to my house and find 2 scarves, white and gray, out of the ground. It was a gift from Camille. But let them be careful. The threads are impregnated with some exotic poison she brought back from Bali. I don't know what kind of poison, but the man stopped for a moment and licked his lips. Yeah, coming out of a coma is like coming out of a long binge. Your throat is drying up, your head spinning. It's hard to breathe, too. Stephen, you should probably rest," the investigator said. "You have basically told us enough. So from now on the work will be strictly for us. If anything is necessary, we will clarify." "Yes, I guess we will. Just tell me something, doctor. My son is dead. Stephen, you take heart. But his death was easy. The man turned away from the window, and a stingy male tear trickled down his cheek. Why should I be surprised? After all, he lost not only his wife and his time, but also his son, everything that kept him in this world. His heart was pounding frantically, and everything swam before his eyes. But Stephen realized that he had only revenge and nothing else. After all, why had the higher powers pulled him from the other world and brought him back here? Stephen turned his head and looked at the doctor who was standing in his room taking readings. Doctor, what would you do? Are you looking for encouragement, or do you want to know if your decision was right? I just want your opinion. I don't know. My wife and I have 2 kids, and even if she did, I wouldn't press charges for the kids. And that bitch killed my son, you understand? I understand, Stephen. And if I judge from your position, then may I not answer your question? Tolia nodded his head. After all, the doctor's lack of answer spoke for itself. How could one denounce his wife, who had borne him 2 children? If in Molly's place had been his hope, he might never have denounced her. But the situation was just the opposite. The doctor left the room, promising to check on him in an hour. And Stephen lay with closed eyes and thought how to live now with this realization that he was betrayed by close people. What loved ones? Just fellow travelers in my life who needed my money. It's a good thing that neither Nadia nor her parents lived to see this moment. And then from the street, Stephen heard the church bells chiming, playing a melodious melody, calling the faithful to the evening service, and whether not to go to a monastery, or smiled at the thought. Yes, he would go to a monastery, though he had many sins, and tomorrow, maybe even more. But it was at these moments that Molly and Tom were already being interrogated. For everyone on the investigative team understood a very complicated crime. It is a crime involving a diplomat and actually a criminal authority. Therefore, they could not just let it go. And they didn't have to let it go. Both women pleaded guilty immediately. Molly was the first to do it, then Camille, who actually got nailed. Video from Camille's ICU. You do realize, as a chemist, that the human brain is an unexplored organ. Even if you thought Stephen couldn't hear you, you could read the lips of everyone sitting behind that security camera screen. And I don't have to read to you now what you said out loud in Bracker's room. I don't have to read what you said out loud in Bracker's room, but almost shouted at the investigators who dragged her out of her office in front of the whole staff and forced her into a dark car with tinted windows and brought her here. If you know everything, why do you need my testimony? For the record, although you have every right not to testify against yourself, I think you're familiar with that rule. Camille didn't say anything. What to say now? She could only tell herself how stupid she had been to go to Molly's husband's room and shit all over herself. The investigator, who read the thoughts on the woman's face, understood that. Although on the one hand, the investigator understood perfectly well that often people are characterized by such rash actions that come out sideways, where it is necessary to sign. Camille understood perfectly well that now she could not get away, and cooperation with the investigation could ease her fate. What's in it for me? A lot depends on who was the organizer and who was the actual perpetrator. And I'm guessing your role in this poisoning is the executor. And then it dawned on her that she might not escape from the clutches of the investigators, but she could significantly reduce her sentence. She threw a quick glance at the investigator and began to say, you see, it was Molly who put me up to it, promised me a position, a manager in her house, money only on condition that I would send her husband away, but I would not just send him away, but so that no one could identify the poison. You understand? Before New Year's, she gave me a trip to Bali, but the locals there showed me a poisonous plant, and you decided to use it. Please note, Mr. Investigator, that was Molly's idea. It was her idea for the poison-soaked scarves, by the way. She kept telling me you couldn't buy an expensive gift for my husband and son, but a personalized scarf would be perfect. But I repent to her promises. Besides the position, manager, what did she promise you? Mr. Investigator, I'll tell you everything, but you tell me what I'll face. Camille belittling. She looked at the investigator, who was rubbing his pen and thinking about her question. No, of course. Camille could not go as an organizer of this murder, because in any case she will go on the case as an executor, and it is already a lesser term. You see, Camille, you are not the organizer in this case. But since we have one dead body and one attempted murder, you'll still get time. Molly will go down as an organizer, and that could be life in prison. Camille clamped her hands over her mouth and almost shrieked at the whole office. No, spare her. She doesn't want to go to a life sentence. But the investigator decided to put even more pressure on Molly Gakjan's friend. I've stated my opinion, but you understand, Camille. The sentence itself is only half of the case. You know very well who Bracker is. You realize that if you do it right, you still have a chance to get out of prison in the prime of your life. And the wrong way. The crime lords can avenge you for their comrade. Camille bit her lips nervously. She was feverishly pondering the investigator's words. She knew perfectly well that if the criminal authorities found out that she had caused Mason's death and the tragedy with Stephen, she would not live for 24 hours in a cell. What can I do to prevent a tragedy? You have the right idea, Camille. And one, tell me everything from the beginning in detail. And believe me, I'll take the officer's word for it. And I'll make sure Molly's guilt is taken into account. Maybe even get you off the hook, although I can't guarantee it. Of course, I'll try to make sure your sentence is either suspended or minimal. Thanks for that. Camille breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that she could get out of this very story, into which she had been drawn by greed and the desire for easy profit. Camille looked away. She realized that her future depended on how well she was going to get it right. You can guarantee me that if I do go to jail, I won't be killed in the dungeons. I'll do my best. And the investigator was as honest with her as possible, although as a professional he knew perfectly well how unrealistic it was. To conceal anything in the criminal world, especially related to Stephen, was impossible. It's like hiding cheese from a mouse, which will find the treat by smell. But it was worth a try. You tell it like it was, and I'll try to get it on the record. And the investigator supported his position in court, but that didn't help Tony much. The court sentenced her to only 5 years in prison for aiding and abetting murder and attempted murder. But even that sentence, she was glad. After all, it was not the term the court had given Molly, 18 years for the murder of her stepson and the attempted murder of her husband for personal gain. Molly sobbed and struggled behind the bars in the courtroom, tearfully praying and complaining that her friend Camille had put her up to it. But the jury and the judge were adamant. What can you say about killing such an honorable man? Molly, you say you were beaten up by Tonya. But how could she influence you? How could she sway you to do such a thing? But you know, Molly, I'm sorry, but I've seen a lot of things in my legal practice, and I've seen a lot. In your situation, though, I just don't understand. How could she influence you? A smart and beautiful girl. Confuse. No. Bribe her. No, she's not related to you. She doesn't owe you money. Why did you do it? Stephen would have left you some part of his inheritance, even if not all of it. Molly only lowered her head and, burying herself in her palms, burst into tears. The girl realized that at her age, 18 years in prison is a sentence and the most painful. What will happen when she gets out? No family, no apartment, no girlfriends, no husband. And her age is not the same. It's her beauty that makes her public. It remains only to go to the monastery, to beg for alms on the porch. This was understood by Stephen, who at the time of the trial of his ex-wife has already come out of intensive care and was undergoing rehabilitation in a private clinic. At first, the man wanted Molly to be put on the airplane, the first cell to local comrades to do with her. But after thinking, he gave up this idea, asked the criminal authorities not to touch her. But how can it be? She killed your son, attempted to kill you, and therein lies my brilliant plan for revenge. I realize that Molly will be fine in the zone with some guard or doctor. And believe me when I tell you, it'll be years away. So And Stephen twisted his arm, showing that Molly's sentence might not be what the court had determined. And every criminalist understood that. And if I could ask you for one thing, bring me to the sentencing hearing. Stephen, what do you want? Asked him by a Turk, an old friend of his. I honestly still feel guilty about that advice to get married and not to put a cross on my family happiness. And it turns out, what? Jacob, but you didn't give me Molly, and you didn't marry her. It was my decision. That's true. But I still feel bad for you, man. And right now I don't think you should go to Tarek's trial. I want to look into the eyes of the bastard who killed my son. He nodded, and without saying anything, went out of Stephen's room. The very next day, when Molly was to announce the verdict, under the hospital stood a car with tinted and bulletproof windows, and waiting for Stephen. Tarek himself sat behind the wheel and nervously knotted his fingers on the steering wheel. He, of course, did not like the very idea of a friend driving to the trial. But as a father, he understood his condition. Tor opened the passenger side door and sat down next to the driver, looked at his old friend, tried to squeeze out a semblance of a smile. Well, friend, let's drive. You're my driver today, and I'm your passenger. No, you're a crazy friend who needs my support. And the rest of you, don't worry about it. I made sure the verdict was announced without the ears of reporters and profit seekers. But keep your cool. Do you doubt otherwise? The great Mongol Jacob shook his head and gave a gasp. Indeed, when Stephen entered the courtroom, there was no one there except the prosecutor and the secretary. Yes, what money can do. All it takes is a coin call, and everything falls into place. A loyal court and no reporters. But the one in the courtroom creaked zeros. The massive oak doors. The man turned his head and saw first the escorts, and then Molly, who was being led in handcuffs, quietly walking across the parquet floor. She was walking with her head held high. But when her gaze fell on Stephen, Molly commanded and began to gulp nervously for air. Get me a doctor. I'm not feeling well. And it wasn't stage. The girl's face was whiter than the wall. She didn't expect to see her ex-husband in the courtroom. Her lips were ringing and her legs were shaking. The escort was not weak, both physically and morally. He quickly took her under his arms and escorted her to the bench. Sit here, I'll call a doctor. He radioed for a doctor to come to room 13. Stephen stood still. He looked carefully at the once beloved woman who only wanted his money. The man slowly approached the bars and, standing a couple steps away, spoke. Here, Molly, we meet. How are you doing behind bars? And you thought the other side was good. No, I'm alive. And don't you worry, you'll live to do your time. I'll even send you packages, so you won't starve. Stephen, how dare you say that? It's all Camille's fault. She definitely talked you out of it. And it's all on me. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't your fault. You let me die. We never would have done anything without you. You'll be in the same colony. Let your friend remind you of me for a few years. And when she gets out, will she send you letters for packages? I don't know. I don't think she'll have enough money to support you, but I'm certainly taking care of her. After all, I owe your friend. She told me about your perfidy. What kind of poison did you give me? You wouldn't dare take Camille into our home. Molly choked with despair. Her friend had essentially outplayed her. No, honey, I can, and I will. She'll help me around the house, and I think she'll serve me like a faithful dog. And sometimes, I hope, she'll tell you in letters what's going on at home, how I'm living. You want to know, don't you? You don't dare do that. The girl's eyes poured with anger. Stephen did not say any more. Smiling, he walked away and sat down on a seat in the front row. He had said what he wanted to say. And in time. For at that minute a doctor and 3 judges entered the courtroom, whispering nervously about something. But when they saw Stephen in the courtroom, they stopped their debate abruptly. Where is the patient? The doctor looked at the girl and realized that the one most likely increased pressure will have to give an injection. You please, you see she's being escorted in. I'm not going behind bars. I need to take her blood pressure and give her an injection." The escort looked at the chief judge, and when he nodded in agreement, he led Molly out of the bars. "Well, the girl's blood pressure is high. I'll give you that." The doctor took out syringes, a needle, alcohol, and an ampoule of the drug from his backpack. He started to prepare the injection. "Come on, girl. Please put your ass in front of me. Let's give you an injection." When all the medical procedures were completed, the judge called the doctor and quietly asked, "We can continue the session?" "You know, I wouldn't do that if I were you. If time and circumstances permit, reschedule it. The patient has really high blood pressure. She doesn't need any unnecessary stress right now, unless you want to bring her to an early demise. The judge has decided to adjourn for 3 days. I'm mentally berating myself for authorizing Stephen Bracker's visit. But what's done is done. I mean, in that situation, it was unrealistic to refuse such a man. After all, his wife was on trial, albeit a suspended ex-wife. But on paper, she's still his legal wife. The judges postponed the trial. The verdict was never announced. But Stephen rode in the car back to the hospital and rejoiced. His son was embarrassed, if only a little. And Molly, they'll get what they deserve. Should I or shouldn't I take her in? No, Stephen, are you serious? In terms of what the man didn't immediately understand the question. But in terms of taking her in, I can. You're a smart man, but do you think I'm a complete idiot? No, I'm sorry. But you told Molly so convincingly in the courtroom that even I believe you. That's good. Then she believed it too. So the plan worked. About how she's gonna live her life after she's done time. Let's believe it. People like that don't go to waste. But maybe not at home. But your ex-wife, she's not gonna last. I don't know. Unless prison and local comrades teach her how. But trust me, I'm not in the mood for that right now. Mongol was driving. He wanted to ask his friend what he would do next. But the question wouldn't come out of his mouth. Why are you so quiet? Friend, you're judging. I'm not God to judge. You better tell me what you're gonna do next. I don't know. Right now, I guess I'll have to get healthy first, then clean up my son's grave. And then maybe I'll travel. My late Nancy loved to travel, but I guess it wasn't her destiny. To see Paris. What else did she want to see? I thought you were in Paris. You told me so yourself. Believe me, it wasn't the same. Now I think I'm gonna buy a backpack and a tent and a professional camera and travel. At least let there be pictures of me. If I couldn't keep my only son safe. And tears ran down Stephen's cheeks. He didn't understand how this could happen. After all, always considered himself strong and restrained such that will definitely not show his emotions. And now here it is. You cry, my friend, cry. It's okay. You don't have to be embarrassed. And he took a sharp turn toward the waterfront. They shouldn't be going anywhere right now. They just wanted to stand and admire the water and nature. Having stopped on the embankment, Mongol got out of the car and looked around. It was a beautiful place. A gazebo, swans, a cafe nearby. Stephen, come on, go outside. Let's go help their feet in the river to feed the swans. And grab a bite to eat. What's at the local diner? It's been a long time since I've just sat around eating chebureks and drinking from a big mug of beer. You're a persuasive man. Stephen wiped his tears and got out of the car. He took out a bottle of water and handed it to his friend. I need to wash my face on my hand. I don't want to go into an establishment like this with red eyes. Let them recede a little, and then already on the beer, and streaks in the face with cool water. Stephen and Mongol stood on the shore and watched the swans swimming gracefully, how they sit and chortle. Between themselves on the shore, fishermen with fishing rods, how children run around in the sand. Life goes on, despite the grief of every person in this world, big and small. So let's go for a beer, friend, and let the world wait. Turning around, they walked into a local establishment and were pleasantly surprised. Everywhere is clean and well thought out. The interior is good wooden furniture. Appetizing smells were coming from the kitchen. A smiling Uzbek in a white apron deftly swept the crumbs off the counter and nodded his head in greeting. "Good afternoon, dear ones. What do you want? Today you can order delicious cheburiks." "Wow. And how do you deal with beer?" "Better in the city. Here is a choice," and the Uzbek showed his hand to the gingerbread sticking out of beer barrels behind his back. "Then 3 cheburiks to your taste and a beer each. Also to your taste, sir. And my friend and I will each take a hand and take a seat at that window over there." And the Mongol pointed to the outermost table. The order was fulfilled quickly, and the dish was excellent. Despite the small appearance of the place, the men chatted over a glass of beer like good old friends, and everyone understood that even in a difficult situation, life does not end. You have to do something. Love every minute of life, even if it takes away your loved ones. Toward evening, when both of them had slowed down, they went outside, and the Mongol called his driver. "Stephen, he'll take you home. And if you need anything, you call me." "Thanks, man. You've already done everything I needed to do, and I'll tell you here. And now I realize one thing." "You know," that friend nodded questioningly, and Stephen, smiling, told him to just live. I sat there and caught myself thinking that I still wanted to live. "For all that I've lost pretty much everything, but you haven't lost yourself." "Yes, I have. I haven't lost myself, and thank you for being there for me. Why don't we take a trip to the great Mongolian steppes? I'll show you my land. Learn to saddle young horses, hunt with falcon, and then drink tea on the threshold of the yurt and admire the cold sunset." Or he smiled and looked at the bright sun, which slowly sloped behind the crowns of trees, and imagined for a moment the picture described by his friend. It was breathtaking. He looked at Jacob and nodded his head. Let things take their course now. Life had indeed set things right. Molly was given 18 years in prison, then 5, but they didn't serve their terms in full. Then we were already 2 years and a half out for good behavior, and Molly really managed to settle in while incarcerated. As expected, Stephen managed to fall in love with the doctor in a year, safely married him. In 3 to give birth to a child and get out, not just for good behavior, but on a fabricated diagnosis. But all this did not bother Stephen, who completely withdrew from diplomatic and criminal affairs, immersed in traveling and exploring the wild corners of the planet. And what is most surprising, it was in this that the man found his solace. Stephen was soothed by ancient ruins, forgotten cities. They reminded him of the frailty of life. That's why his photos came out realistic. People seemed that they themselves were in these lands, sighed the aroma of exotic dishes, looked at people before the outer civilizations, and only organized unique photo exhibitions. "Stephen, what is your success?" once asked him a journalist at one of the exhibitions in America. The man thought for a moment and smiled. He had long ago found the answer to this question, but only now he came to the point of giving an answer publicly. "You know, or rather you don't know, but in each of my photos I try to find an image of my son. It could be his favorite tree or flower, or a boy who looks like him. Or maybe a boy like my Mason was when he was young. They say your ex-wife killed him. That's true. Yes, she poisoned him. But I don't blame her greed. It's one of the vices of man. And I'm flesh and blood. I blame myself for not dying in his place." And there was silence in the hall, without collusion. All those who were at the exhibition in the hall stood up and bowed their heads in a sign of respect, not for Bracker's son, but just for the young man who left this world untimely. Stephen was touched and simply could not hold back the tears. But he did not want to show his weakness, so he simply thanked the audience and stood up and went backstage. Only now he realized that for the sake of people's memory, it is worth living on this planet, and let his son have a good time there on the clouds. And he still has a lot to do. He still has so many unrealized cases and projects.